Hey everyone, this is chapter 12 of The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Text of Critical Marxism, uh, Volume 2, edited by Sean Matt Gamna. This chapter is titled The Revolutionary Party. The little introduction says, the minorities charged that the majority practiced, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, end quote, and the majorities charged that the minority were lightweight, quote, petty bourgeois intellectuals, end quote, played a large part in the 1940 split. Even before the split, Cannon proclaimed it as a decisive step, quote, from a loosely organized propaganda circle and discussion club to a centralized and disciplined proletarian party, end quote. After the split, the Orthodox developed a new regime and a new conception of what Marxism and a revolutionary socialist party were and had to be. The first piece is titled, quote, or labeled, quote, a military organization, end quote. This is a discussion between Trotsky and James P. Cannon from the 12th to 15th of June, 1940. It's from Trotsky's writings, 1939 to 40. Cannon. I think that the party in the eyes of the leading militants should be considered as a military organization. The party form should be much more considerably formalized in a deliberate form of hierarchical organization, a strict record of grades of authority in the party, ... Trotsky. It is necessary to create an elastic relationship between democracy and centralism. We have enough hundreds of members who have passed through enough experiences who now require a more centralized organization. These people in another 10 years will be the old guard. These cadres, in a new phase, can give the possibility of some hundreds of thousands of members of different origin. These people can introduce new tendencies of criticism. To assimilate them, it can't be done by centralism. It is necessary to enlarge the democracy, to let them find that the old guard is more experienced. So after a period of very centralized existence, you can have a new period of wide discussion, then a more normalized centralized period. Our growth will be a convulsive growth. It can introduce into its ranks some half-raw human material. It is a tremendous advantage to have the support of the cadres. They will explain to the new comrades. At the same time, it is dangerous to impose centralism too soon on new members who don't have this tradition of esteem for the leadership which is based by and large on experiences of the past, ... During a severe war, i.e. the Russian Civil War, the party relations indicated a severe and military organization. In spite of all, the party equilibrium was preserved. Even at the front, we had closed party meetings, where all party members discussed with complete freedom, criticized orders, etc. ... Discussion with Trotsky. Again, this conversation is labeled, quote, a military organization, end quote. Between James P. Cannon, it's a conversation between James P. Cannon and Leon Trotsky from the 12th to 15th of June, 1940, in Trotsky's collective writings, The Writings of Leon Trotsky, or Writings of Leon Trotsky, 1939 to 40. The next piece is titled, or labeled, Our Bolshevik Party Already Exists. It's by James P. Cannon. It's from 1946. This is from the piece titled Theses on the American Revolution, published in Fourth International, January 1947. It's a very important document. I should read it. Our Bolshevik Party Already Exists, by James P. Cannon, 1946. I already said that, but... The decisive instrument of the proletarian revolution is the party of the class-conscious vanguard. Failing the leadership of such a party, the most favorable revolutionary situations, which arise from the objective circumstances, cannot be carried through to the final victory of the proletariat and the beginnings of planned reorganization of society on socialist foundations. This was demonstrated most conclusively and positively in the 1917 Russian Revolution. This same principled lesson derives no less irrefutably, even though negatively, from the entire world experience of the epoch of wars, revolutions, and colonial uprisings that began with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. However, this basic conclusion from the vast and tragic experience of the last third of a century can be and has been given a reactionary interpretation by a school of neo-revisionism, represented by the ideologues, philosophers, and preachers of prostration, capitulation, and defeat. They say, in effect, quote, "Since the Revolutionary Party is small and weak, it is idle to speak of revolutionary possibilities. The weakness of the party changes everything," end quote. The authors of this, quote, "theory," end quote, reject and repudiate Marxism, embracing in Marxism's place the subjective school of sociology. They isolate the factor of the revolutionary party's relative numerical weakness at a particular moment from the totality of objective economic and political developments which create all the necessary and sufficient conditions for the swift growth of the revolutionary vanguard party. Given an objectively revolutionary situation, a proletarian party, even a small one, equipped with a precisely worked-out Marxist program and firm cadres, can expand its forces and come to the head of the revolutionary mass movement in a comparatively brief span of time. This too is proved conclusively and positively by the experiences of the Russian Revolution in 1917. There the Bolshevik Party, headed by Lenin and Trotsky, bounded forward from a tiny minority, just emerging from underground isolation in February to the conquest of power in October, a period of 9 months. Numerical weakness, to be sure, is not a virtue for a revolutionary party, but a weakness to be overcome by persistent work and resolute struggle. In the U.S., all the conditions are in the process of unfolding for the rapid transformation of the organized vanguard from a propaganda group to a mass party strong enough to lead the revolutionary struggle for power. The hopeless contradictions of American capitalism, inextricably tied up with the death agony of world capitalism, are bound to lead to a social crisis of such catastrophic proportions as will place the proletarian revolution on the order of the day. In this crisis, it is realistic to expect that the American workers, who attain trade union consciousness and organization within a single decade, will pass through another great transformation in their mentality, attaining political consciousness and organization. If in the course of this dynamic development a mass labor party based on the trade unions is formed, it will not represent a detour into reformist stagnation and futility, as happened in England and elsewhere in the period of capitalist ascent. From all indications, it will rather represent a preliminary stage in the political radicalization of the American workers, preparing them for the direct leadership of the Revolutionary Party. The Revolutionary Vanguard Party, destined to lead the tumultuous revolutionary movement in the U.S., does not have to be created. It already exists, and its name is the Socialist Workers' Party. It is the sole legitimate heir and continuator of pioneer American communism and the revolutionary movements of the American workers from which it sprang. The Socialist Workers' Party's nucleus has already taken shape in 3 decades of unremitting work and struggle against the stream. The Socialist Workers' Party program has been hammered out in ideological battles and successfully defended against every kind of revisionist assault upon it. The fundamental core of a professional leadership has been assembled and trained in the irreconcilable spirit of the combat party of the revolution. The task of the Socialist Workers' Party consists simply in this: to remain true to its program and banner, to render it more precise and with each new development, and apply it correctly in the class struggle, and to expand and grow with the growth of the revolutionary mass movement, always aspiring to lead it to victory in the struggle for political power. The end. Again, this piece was labeled "Our Bolshevik Party Already Exists" by James Buchanan, 1946, which is excerpted from Theses on the American Revolution, published in Fourth International, January 1947. The next piece is labeled "The Kind of Party We Are Building" by Max Shachtman, published in 1945. This is from, quote, 5 Years of the Workers' Party, end quote. New International, April 1945. We've actually, in reading this book, we've actually read like previous excerpts from 5 Years of the Workers' Party. So maybe I should read that piece in its entirety. Perhaps our greatest gain is in the kind of party we have succeeded in building. In it we have living proof that a Bolshevik party does not mean the totalitarian prison so many people have been led to believe that a Bolshevik party always was and must always be. The democratic character of our organization is not merely our boast. Militants and radicals outside our party know the facts and acknowledge them. Our party is intolerant of any attempts to curb the intellectual freedom and critical independence of its membership. All it demands is rigid discipline and action and a high degree of responsibility in building up the party. It is able to make and enforce this demand not only because its main policies appear to be correct, but because there is no bureaucratic regime, quote, benevolent, end quote, or otherwise, in the party. Without ever descending to the futility of a, quote, debating society, end quote, our party has repeatedly had the freest discussions of political and theoretical questions. Some have been confined to the party ranks, but the more important ones have also been discussed in public in the pages of our New International. Some of them have been extremely ardent, even sharply polemical. Groups' ideological formations of different kinds have existed in the party and continue to exist in one form or another. On one question or another, they will probably always exist. But we have no resolutions calling for the, quote, dissolution of the factions, end quote. And if good Bolshevik practice continues to prevail, we shall never have such resolutions. We have established in our party such a relationship between leaders and members and of all members with each other, and between adopted program and criticism of the adopted program, that there is no air in the party for a bureaucratic or clique regime, and there after all lies the secret of the absence of permanent factions, as distinguished from ideological groupings. There are no such factions because there is no soil, a bureaucratic regime, for factions to grow in. It must be said that the kind of party we have built up is our richest possession. In itself, it does not guarantee against making political mistakes, including serious political mistakes, but it makes possible a speedy correction of such mistakes if they are made, a correction without the convulsive crises to which bureaucratized parties are doomed whenever a serious difference of opinion forces its way past the lid. From this standpoint, it might be added in passing, the big obstacle to the union of the two Trotskyist organizations in this country is not so much the political differences that exist. Although some of these differences are greater than they were 5 years ago, others have become less acute. In any event, people with even greater political experience could live and work side by side in a single party, provided it were a normal party. It is no secret, for example, that in our own party close cooperation is possible between comrades who on some questions have greater differences between themselves than our party as a whole has on other questions with the Socialist Workers' Party. The principal obstacle, as this writer sees it, lies precisely in the sterile bureaucratic regime which the Canaanites have imposed upon and continue to maintain in the Socialist Workers' Party, a regime which the new minority in the Socialist Workers' Party rightly describes as Stalinist in its trend. Unity is a precious thing. The kind of party that would result from unity is, however, far more important. Our comrades are not disposed for a minute to trade off what they have built up for any regime that smacks of canonism. The last 30 years have been rich in events and in lessons for the working class, if not in victories. If we were asked to tell what makes us believe that the final victory will go to socialism, we would answer, capitalism has shown conclusively that it cannot advance society and civilization, but only drive society and civilization further along the road of exhausting conflict, human degradation, barbarism, and ruin. It no longer has a capacity for stability, order, peace, and progress. The working class, even those sections of the working class that have been most cruelly oppressed, has shown a power of recuperation from defeat and resources of resistance to capitalist decay that amply justify our confidence in its eventual triumph. It has proved repeatedly that the conditions for its existence and progress is the struggle against the conditions of its existence. That is how it has been, and that is how it must be. Although the connections between conscious socialism and the working class were broken once by this old social democracy and the old social democracy's program, I skipped a line. Although the connections between conscious socialism and the working class were broken once by the old social democracy and again by Stalinism, the connections between conscious socialism and the working class have not been destroyed. The connections between conscious socialism and the working class exist in the form of our movement and our movement's program, and they will be strengthened. The firmness of our party and the confirmation of our party's program by events justified the confidence we have in both. They justify also our confidence that the revolutionary international of the working class, a most important matter that cannot be dealt with briefly because it requires and deserves a chapter for itself, will be restored and solidified. What makes the struggle for socialism and freedom seem more difficult also makes it more urgently necessary. It simply makes no sense to us when we are told that encroaching capitalist barbarism is destroying the prospects of socialism, and it is better to give up the fight. That is the talk of demoralized and spiritually vanquished serfs. It's precisely the fact that decomposing capitalism is filling the air with its poisonous fumes that imposes upon us the redoubling of our efforts to bury the putrid beast. Let the cowards flinch and the traitors sneer. Our minds are incapable of absorbing the truly monstrous idea that humanity, which has shown so often an irresistible passion for liberty and an inexhaustible capacity for achieving it progressively, will now, at the historic pinnacle of its intellectual and social development, finally yield to the yoke in permanence. Like brute cattle, we reiterate our faith in the people, in the working class, and dedicate ourselves again, on this 5th anniversary, to the socialist emancipation. Again, this piece was labeled "The Kind of Party We Are Building," and it comes, and it's an excerpt from the piece titled 5 Years of the Workers' Party by Max Shachtman, published in New International in April 1945. The next piece is labeled "A Homogeneous Party" by the Socialist Workers' Party, and it's from 1946. This is an excerpt from a piece titled "Revolutionary Marxism or Petty Bourgeois Revisionism," Statement of the Political Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party. And it's from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 8, Number 10, August 1946. The organization question, our concept of the party and how to build it, was the second big issue in dispute between ourselves and the Burnham-Shachtman faction in 1939-40. The discussions on this question, recorded in 2 books, In Defense of Marxism by Leon Trotsky and The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by James P. Cannon, have in truth exhausted the differences between our 2 concepts of the party. As a matter of fact, very little fundamentally new has been said on this subject since Lenin wrote his memorable work, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, which comprises the record and an analysis of the struggle between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks at the 1903 convention of the Russian Social Democratic Party. The Shachtmanites, who show an organic tendency toward opportunism in every political question, naturally display the same tendency in the organizational sphere, in their concept of the character of the party, in their methods of building the party. The 6-year struggle between ourselves and the Workers' Party has imparted to our differences on this question a finished character. We want a party of workers, a party that is disciplined both for the leaders and the rank and file, a party of action and struggle, a party that is Marxist to the marrow of its bones, a party which shrugs off with contempt all alien ideologies and pressures, a party so constituted that that party can seriously contemplate leading the workers in the revolution. That is why we believe in a homogeneous party, a party built solidly upon a common program and common methods. We reject any concept of a party of fundamentally different tendencies. Such a party can never forge a genuine discipline, and is destined to fly apart in opposite directions when confronted with the first serious test. We are firm believers in party democracy, and we practice party democracy. But we insist that democracy be combined with centralism, not just in name but in fact. We insist that once a decision has been taken, the discussions shall cease and the minority subordinate itself to the will of the majority. Despite all their protestations to the contrary, the Shachtmanites want and have constructed a, quote, discussion club, end quote, party, a petty bourgeois, quote, madhouse, end quote, a perpetual talking shop. They are still hunting for the fourth dimension of party democracy. Their every instinct and their most deep-rooted characteristics force them to want and to do everything they can to create a party which will forever be a happy hunting ground for, quote, littérateurs, quote, independent spirits, quote, free souls, end quote. They want a party which has an accommodating attitude toward every perversion of Marxism, a party where one feels free to, quote, experiment, end quote. The Socialist Workers' Party resolution on, quote, organization principles, end quote, adopted by the founding convention in 1938 declares, the revolutionary Marxian party rejects not only the arbitrariness and bureaucratism of the Communist Party, but also the spurious and deceptive, quote, all-inclusiveness, end quote, of the Thomas Tyler Hone Socialist Party, which is a sham and a fraud. Experience had proved conclusively that this, quote, all-inclusiveness, end quote, paralyzes the party in general and the revolutionary left wing in particular, ... The Socialist Workers' Party seeks to be inclusive only in this sense, that it accepts into its ranks those who accept its program and denies admission to those who reject its program. The Shachtmanites fought against this concept of a homogeneous Bolshevik organization in the faction struggle and split of 1939 to 40. Thus, by implication, they adopted the principle of a, quote, all-inclusive, end quote, talking shop party. Today, the Workers' Party has explicitly embraced this opportunist concept of organization, ... Shachtman declares, quote, we are unlike these previous movements, parenthesis, I don't know if this is a quote, I guess this is a quote, yeah. We are unlike these previous 10 movements, parenthesis, the Bolsheviks before 1917, the Communist Party of America any time in the Communist Party of America's history, or the Communist League of America any time in the Communist League of America's history, in parentheses, and that our composition is much broader than theirs at any time. Our program and theories are not less clearly and strictly defined than were theirs. Our party, however, makes room for, and allows for the free functioning of people who have such differences with our party's theories and policies as were never tolerated or possible in the movements before. Do you have any doubt about it? If so, tell me of one revolutionary Marxist party which allowed for such a wide range of differences in its ranks as we allow in our party. If you go through the histories with a glass, you will not find one because there never was one. ... Such a wide range of differences in a reformist party? Yes, and even a wider range at one time or another, but never before in a revolutionary party! Exclamation point. I think it was Erber who coined the phrase that our party is an all-inclusive revolutionary party. Parenthesis, the underlined word sufficiently distinguishes us from Norman Thomas's all-inclusive reformist party, end parenthesis. Properly understood, I am ready and proud to refer to ourselves by this formula. End quote. Max Shachtman, Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 1, Number 14, May 15th, 1946. That's the end of this piece, which again was labeled A Homogeneous Party, Socialist Workers' Party, 1946, and it's an excerpt from Revolutionary Marxism or Petty Bourgeois Revisionism, Statement of the Political Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party. It's from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 8, Number 10, August 1946. The next piece is labeled, Your Party is Zinovievist, not Leninist, It's by Max Shachtman and Ernest Rice McKinney. It was published in Labor Action on the 11th of November, 1946. We can be and are in favor of unity, in spite of the differences that exist between our parties, because we have a different conception of the party than your leadership has. We do not deny it. On the contrary, we want to underline this difference. We are consciously trying to build a party which is based firmly on the principles and traditions of revolutionary Marxism, and which, precisely because of that, provides for the most genuine and not merely formalistic party democracy. Party democracy, from our point of view, we consider that point of view to be in absolute harmony with the best traditions of the authentic Marxian movement, calls for the strictest observance of discipline and action, precisely because, given the firm principled foundation of the party, it provides for the freest interplay in the party of all opinions which stand on the basic principles of Marxism, and consequently provides for genuinely free and critical expression, discussion, and debate. We reject categorically and indignantly all those who hold that Bolshevism was not democratic, that the genuine Bolshevik party was in the remotest way comparable to its present-day Stalinist antithesis. That is why we aim to build a Bolshevik party, for only in a Bolshevik party is it possible to have that free and fruitful interplay of ideas, even when those ideas take the form of tendencies and even factions. That is all that is meant by those of our comrades who employ the term a all-inclusive revolutionary party, quote, a quote, all-inclusive revolutionary party, end quote. That is, an utterly Bolshevik party in which true party democracy is cherished in the same passion that monolithism is abhorred. Your leadership, on the other hand, is opposed to unity with us precisely and above all because of our conception of the party, which, we do not hesitate to say, we would seek to instill into the very blood of the United Party if it came into existence. It is nonsense to think that the opposition to unity is based on the difference between us on the Russian question, the national question, or the other questions which are dealt with in the statement of your political committee. We do not say this because these questions are not important. They are of tremendous importance, they are of vital importance, but in the eyes of your leadership, they fade into unimportance compared with the question of its conception of the party. It has the conception of a monolithic party. That is what is meant when it speaks of a, quote, homogeneous, end quote, party. That conception requires currency and supremacy in the communist movement. That conception acquired currency and supremacy in the communist movement after the usurpation of leadership in the communist movement by the Zinoviev-Stalin faction, after the death of Lenin, after the launching of the reactionary struggle against, quote, Trotskyism, end quote. The Zinovievist preachment of a, quote, homogeneous and, quote, monolithic, end quote, party marked and symbolized the beginning of the end of Bolshevik party democracy, and what that end is, we all know. Bracket, after its fourth Congress in 1924, the leadership of the Communist International around Zinoviev launched a drive for, quote, Bolshevization, for, quote, monolithic, end quote, organization, and against political, quote, deviations, end quote, notably, quote, Trotskyist or, quote, Luxemburgist, end quote, end bracket. Yeah, this is something that's, like, super interesting to me, because I've heard this mentioned before, that I think even Ernest Haberkern, like, says that Trotsky had never, more or less, accepted the Zinovievist conception of the party. But, I don't know what that means. We cannot consider it a mere coincidence that the leader of your party, the one who sets its tone and course, was one of the principal, quote, Bolshevizers, end quote, in the Zinovievist style in the communist movement of a score of years ago. It's important, also, not important, but why am I saying it's important? There's a piece about Max Eastman and his, like, experience and, like, reflections on Bolshevization, written by Lauren Goldner, that I really, really should read. We cannot consider it a mere coincidence that the leader of your party, the one who sets its tone and course, was one of the principal, quote, Bolshevizers, end quote. We cannot consider it a mere coincidence that the leader of your party, Cannon, The one who sets its tone and course was one of the principal, quote, Bolshevizers, end quote, in the Zinovievist style in the communist movement of a score of years ago. It is not his course, then, that is so reprehensible. It is his repetition of his course today in the Trotskyist movement that is reprehensible. The statement of your political committee continually sneer at our party for being a, quote, discussion club, end quote, not because it is against a discussion club, but because it is against discussions which upset the comfortable routine of the party bureaucracy. The statement of your political committee sneers at the fact that we, quote, tolerate, end quote, so many differences of opinion in our ranks, because its ideal is a rank and file which has no differences with the leadership, and a leadership which, quote, arranges, end quote, its disagreements by clique decisions. Hold on. The statement, your political committee sneers at the fact that we, quote, tolerate, end quote, so many differences of opinion in our ranks, because your political committee's ideal is a rank and file which has no differences with the leadership, and a leadership which, quote, arranges, end quote, that leadership's disagreements, which, quote, arranges, end quote, its disagreements by clique decisions. The statement of your political committee sneers at the fact that, quote, there is no dearth of answers, end quote, to the many problems that beset a living revolutionary party like ours, because its ideal is a party in which there is not and cannot be more than one, quote, answer, end quote. Your leadership betrays its bureaucratic Zinovievist monolithism in every line of its attack on our conception of a revolutionary party. That is why your leadership is so obdurate in its opposition to unity. It knows the consequences to its own concepts and its own regime that would follow from living and working inside one party with hundreds of devoted, serious, able, thoughtful, and critical revolutionists who have views of their own and know how to advance them. These are the reasons why we have no confidence in your leadership from the standpoint of protecting the principles of genuine party democracy. We have always said forthrightly, we must repeat it here, we want no misunderstanding on this score. Unity is desirable. Unity is necessary, and unity is possible only if it is imposed upon the leadership that has stood and still stands in the way. Unity imposed upon a reluctant membership would not be worth a scrap of paper, but unity can be achieved by imposing unity upon a reluctant leadership, whose bureaucratic concepts must be subjected to the needs and interests of the united revolutionary movement in this country. What could be done toward the accomplishment of this task, we have done and will continue to do. On the unity question, we do not withdraw a single proposal that we have made. Now it is up to the members of the Socialist Workers' Party and of the whole International to assume their responsibilities in the accomplishment of this task. That is how the matter stands today. Your political committee statement has set up new criteria for membership in the Trotskyist movement. They are calculated to perpetuate and deepen the split in the United States. But that is not all. If your leaders seek, as they will, to impose these criteria upon the Fourth International as a whole, we are in for a period of splits and disaggregation in the worldwide movement. A serious application of these new utterly sectarian and authentically bureaucratic criteria means immediately splitting the British, the French, the Spanish, the German, the Italian, the Greek, and other sections of the International. It means the reconstruction of the International in the image of a narrow-minded faction at the best and clique at the worst. This is a warning, and a warning that every serious comrade will reflect upon 20 times before he commits himself or allows his party to commit itself to these new criteria aimed at preventing the unity in this country and of inducing the split into others. For the sake of unity, we were ready to sacrifice a good deal. These sacrifices we are still prepared to make, but under no conditions were we prepared yesterday, are we prepared today, or will be prepared tomorrow, to abandon our political and theoretical views and our right to advance our political and theoretical views, and above all sacrifice our conception of a revolutionary Marxist party based on real party democracy. That conception is the only conceivable basis upon which unity with us is possible. We cannot state this more categorically. As with all our views, This one, too, we shall hold to and fight for to the end. Again, this piece, that's the end of the piece, and it was labeled, "Your party is Zinovievist, not Leninist." It's by Max Shachtman and Ernest Rice McKinney. And it's published in Labor Action. It's published in Labor Action, 11th of November, 1946. The history of Bolshevism can be found in our deeds is the next piece. It's by James P. Cannon, and it's from 1944. And it's from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 10, November 1944. Our tendency is the only one in the labor movement that analyzes the role of Stalinism in the capitalist countries correctly, that is, as an agency of capitalist imperialism in the labor movement, seeking to buy concessions for the nationalist bureaucracy of the USSR at the expense of the world proletariat and the colonial peoples. In this, they are like any other group of privileged bureaucrats and aristocrats of labor who ally themselves with the exploiters against the deprived and oppressed masses, only magnified 1,000 times. This is the little secret which explains the phenomenon which mystifies and baffles the professional, quote, Democrats, end quote, the, quote, hearty, end quote, if temporary accord between the Stalinist bureaucracy and the Anglo-American imperialists. Those who do not understand that Stalinism is represented by the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union, as well as by its foreign agencies, is a tendency a section of the world labor movement cannot begin to understand it or reason it, or the reason it wields such a great influence and consequently cannot fight it effectively. On the contrary, the opportunists of all shades and those who look for some way of compromise with capitalism are at bottom no different from the Stalinists, and sooner or later cooperate with them in one form or another when the vital interests of the capitalist order imperiously require it. It is the degree of acuteness of the class struggle, not the, quote, ideology, end quote, of the different variations of imperialist agencies in the labor movement, that decides whether they quarrel among themselves or work together against the revolutionary masses. Witness the anarchists and socialists in Spain, the People's Front, the socialist-Stalinist cooperation in Italy. Here at bottom we have already seen the Hillman-Browder amity in the PAC, the no-strike pledge bloc at the Auto Convention, and the Stalinist-Tobin combination against us. When the masses really take the road of resolute struggle in their own interest, they are compelled to turn against Stalinism because they come up against its malign policy at every step. They can wage this struggle only under our leadership and no other. We, however, can lead this struggle only if we insist upon irreconcilable programmatic clarity on the question of the Soviet Union, and hence of Stalinism, sternly reject any kind of unity with other groups who bring confusion into this question, and tolerate no taint of conciliationism in this respect. We firmly believe that the cadres of the Fourth International, which are again emerging in Europe, can grow and prosper, and come to the leadership of the revolutionary struggle of the workers against imperialism and its Stalinist agents, only insofar as they follow this line. We believe that the tendencies in our own ranks in the U.S. towards conciliation with the petty bourgeois opposition, represented by the present opposition to the party leadership, is an anti-Trotskyist tendency. The incident of the New York membership meeting, where several members were censored for conducting political discussions with Workers' Party members without the knowledge of the party, appears to have touched off a debate in which some fundamental questions on which the party has more than once spoken decisively are again called up for review.
That is strange, for even at a distance, without knowing the details of the affair, it is difficult for one to misunderstand the simple issue involved. The New York organization wants to control and direct all the political activity of its members, and took this method of asserting its will in this respect. A Leninist can only applaud this attitude. Of course, one may hold the opinion, since it is our traditional practice to go very slow with organizational measures, that a pedagogical exploration of this elementary principle, without a formal censor, would have been sufficient. If the grievance were confined to this tendency, organizational side of the affair, redress of the grievance would undoubtedly be obtained. A big discussion over such a small matter would not be worthwhile. The article of Comrade Morrison, however, raises larger issues. This was also the case, as I am informed, in the discussion of the New York membership meeting. These issues require discussion and clarification. In appealing to the party against the procedure of local New York, Morrison resorts to arguments which are far-reaching in their implications. A discussion of these arguments is decidedly in order and necessary, since, whether so intended or not, these arguments represent an assault against the traditions of Bolshevism all along the line in the name of the traditions of Bolshevism. This anomaly can be explained only on only one of two hypotheses. Either Morrison has neglected to inform himself of the traditional practices of Bolshevik organization, or he is again indulging his well-known penchant for understanding the intelligence of other people. This time of people who know something about the tradition which he invokes, the tradition of Bolshevism. Morrison's arguments have a tradition, but it is not the tradition of Bolshevism. What does Morrison mean when he refers to the history of Bolshevism? Does Morrison know that it is our own history, that we have been doing for the past 16 years, but writing the continuing history of Bolshevism in life? Bolshevism is not a mummy preserved in a Russian museum, but a living movement which long ago crossed the borders of the Soviet Union and became worldwide in Bolshevism's scope. The Russian part of the history of Bolshevism was never definitely written, and although its main outlines are well known, there is a sad lack of documentation in the English language available to the modern student. Our part of this history, however, the history of the Fourth International in general, and our party in particular, has been written and documented. The history of our party is a chapter of the history of living Bolshevism, and not the poorest chapter either, for it was written in 16 years of reaction, defeats and uphill struggle all the way from the beginning up to the present day. We have waged an unceasing and irreconcilable theoretical and political fight against the Stalinist degeneration, but not only that, our record is also a record of struggle against all other anti-Marxist tendencies as well. Our fight against sectarianism was conducted on classic lines. Our fight on all fronts, theoretical, political, and organizational, against the petty bourgeois revisionists recapitulated the whole historical struggle of Bolshevism and Menshevism. In building our party, we employed from the beginning the organizational methods of Lenin, and successfully fought off every attempt, and there were many, to replace them by anarcho-Menshevik substitutes. The older members of our party know its history as a part of the authentic history of Bolshevism. They do not need to be told that Morrison's arguments are not drawn from this arsenal. The younger party members who want to know what the traditional practice of Bolshevism practices of Bolshevism are, have not far to seek. They need only study the history of their own party. There is no lack of material. The contentions of Morris can find no support in this history, but on the contrary directed against it. In a published letter, written while at work on the pamphlet which forms the first section of the Struggle for a Proletarian Party, which is the book by James Cannon, I remarked that the pamphlet was not designed to influence the course of the inter-party struggle when drawing to its end, but was rather being, quote, written for the future, end quote. The arguments of Morrison transformed this, quote, future, end quote, into the present. The answer to these arguments, written in advance, appears in polemics directed against the organizational conceptions of the petty bourgeois opposition. When it comes to organization, we follow Lenin, and nobody is going to talk us out of it. Lenin always paid far more attention to the, quote, organizational question, end quote, was far stricter, firmer, more definite about it, precisely because he really aimed to build a party to lend a revolution. The Mensheviks only dabbled with the idea, but Lenin was in earnest. Lenin had it in his blood. This difference, and what a difference, manifested itself even before any political differences were formulated. So it has always been. Quote, hard and, quote, soft approaches to the organization question have marked every conflict of the two opposing tendencies from the very first preliminary skirmishes at the Russian Party Congress of 1903 up to the present time. The documents of our party history testify to the role this question played in the last great party fight against the petty bourgeois faction of Burnham and Shachtman. It is a historic fact that the 1903 split between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, a premature split to be sure, took place over the formulation of the first paragraph of the party constitution defining party membership. In fact, did not. Lenin was in the minority on that question at the Congress, but did not split over it. The split came through the Mensheviks refusing to accept the editorial board for the party paper Iskra elected at the Congress. Even there, says Trotsky in his autobiography, quote, the two divergent tendencies were unmistakable. Lenin wanted clear-cut, perfectly defined relationships within the party. Martov tended toward diffuse forms, end quote. Trotsky. The debate which has arisen over the affair of the New York membership meeting in the year 1944 sounds like an echo of these words. Insisting on, quote, perfectly definite relationships within the party, end quote, Bolshevism, all the outraged howling of its opponents to the contrary notwithstanding, has nevertheless always been and is now completely free from any trace of dogmatic rigidity, fixity, or finality in its organizational forms and procedures. Our organizational methods are designed to serve political ends, are always subordinated to them, and are readily amended, changed, or even turned upside down to suit them. Democratic centralism, for example, is not a dogma to be understood statically, as a form containing the unchanging quantities of 50% democracy and 50% centralism. Democratic centralism is a dialectical concept in which the emphasis is continually being shifted in consonance with the changing needs of the party in its process of development. A period of virtually unrestricted internal democracy, which is normally the rule during this discussion of disputed questions under legal conditions, can be replaced by a regime of military centralism for party action under conditions of external persecution and danger, and vice versa, and all conceivable gradations between these two extremes can be resorted to without doing violence to the principle of democratic centralism. What is essential is that the right emphasis be placed at the right time. Bolshevism, far from any dogmatic rigidity ascribed to it by superficial critics, is distinguished by the great flexibility of Bolshevism's organizational forms and methods. This does not signify, however, that there are no definite rules, no basic principles. These principles, in fact, are unchanging in their essence, no matter how flexibly the party may see fit to apply them in different situations. Two of these basic principles, which are recognized by every Bolshevik, but which appear to need reassertion in the light of the dispute over the New York incident, may be set down as follows. 1. The party is conceived as a combat organization destined to lead a revolution. It is not a freethinkers' discussion club, not a mere forum for self-expression and self-improvement, imposing no personal obligations on its members. The party is not an anarchist madhouse where everyone does as he pleases, but an army which faces the world outside as a unit. 2. Following from this, it is an unchanging party law that the party has the right to control and direct the political activity of each and every member, to be informed about and regulate and supervise the relations, if any, of each and every member with political opponents of the party, and to demand of each and every loyal member disciplined compliance with party decisions and instructions, and 100%, not 99%, total loyalty to the party. Anyone who disputes these principles does not talk our language. Anyone who disputes these principles must seek support for his arguments from some other source in the history of our party. He will not find it there. Morrison discerns. I'm not sure who Morrison is. Who's Morrison's pen? Who Morrison refers to? Morrison discerns evidence of, quote, Stalinism in the procedure of the New York organization and other incidents, and is greatly disturbed by symptoms of, quote, degeneration, which Morrison sees, or thinks Morrison sees, on every side. Morrison says, quote, since the terrible Stalinist degeneration, every serious person in the Marxist movement fears and thinks of possible degeneration, end quote. Again, quote, Let not one single Stalinist germ penetrate into our ranks, end quote, and so on and so forth. Such warnings have a familiar ring. We have heard them many times before, but up till now our party has successfully resisted all dangers of Stalinist degeneration, with or without benefit from the numerous warnings which their authors unfortunately were not always equally successful in resisting. Other forms of degeneration no better than the Stalinist variety. The history of our party contains some instructive lessons on this point also. The danger of degeneration in a revolutionary party comes from the pressure of its environment. The founding cadres of our party came exclusively from the Communist Party, and for the first 5 years of our existence we maintained the position of a faction, seeking to reform the parent organization and disclaiming any desire to form an independent party. Our most immediate environment, therefore, was the Communist Party, in which the process of Stalinist degeneration was in full swing. Moreover, the successes of the Soviet industrialization at that time, the period of the first 5-year plan, contrasted to the destructive crisis in the capitalist world, were lending great prestige to the Stalinists. The Communist Party was rapidly expanding in membership and influence. Its domination of the progressive labor movement and of the radical intellectual circles was complete. The pressure upon our small dissident group was very strong at that time. It is a historic fact worth noting that the great majority of the original cadres of the left opposition throughout the world succumbed to this pressure. Quote, capitulation, end quote, to the Stalinist regime decimated the ranks of the opposition like a plague in one country after another. How did the young Trotskyist organization in America fare under these hard conditions? Nothing of the kind happened here. A few casual individuals of no specific influence who had joined us on, quote, democratic, end quote, grounds, perhaps half a dozen all told, gave up the fight and went back to the Stalinist camp as capitulators. Quote, democracy, end quote, alone is not an adequate platform for a serious and protracted political fight. But not a single leader, not a single American Trotskyist of influence, nationally or locally, then or ever made peace with Stalinism. From this fact, which speaks louder than anybody's words, one is entitled to infer that the American section of the international left opposition, the predecessor of the Fourth International, was pretty well inoculated against the Stalinist degeneration from the start, and that inference would be 100% correct. We educated our cadres, and ourselves, to fight the theoretical and political positions of Stalinism, not only its organizational methods and techniques. Yes, it may be said once again, you thoroughly exposed Stalinism and taught the advanced workers to despise Stalinism, but in waging this fight, you yourselves adopted the, quote, methods, end quote, of Stalinism. Of course, we know all about that. We have heard all about that before, and we answer them as we answer now. Stalinism is not a system of, quote, methods, as Stalinism's superficial critics imagine, but a political tendency with a definite social basis. The social basis of a privileged bureaucracy in the Soviet Union and its hired agents throughout the world. The, quote, methods are the result, not the cause. These methods, bureaucratic violence, lying, falsifying, double-dealing, betraying, are needed by a bureaucracy serving special interest in forcing through a policy which violates the doctrines and traditions of Bolshevism. But what need have we of these methods? What special interest do we serve which conflict with the interests of the rank and file of the party and the working class? What false policy do we have to impose on them by violence and fraud? Burnham and Shachtman are still trying to find a plausible answer to these questions. Morrison will have no better success. It is not much of an answer to say that this or that individual is by nature a Stalinist who perversely employs methods in a small party dedicated to the struggle against Stalinism. Why has the party, which is anti-Stalinist to the core, tolerated such individuals and even placed them in central positions of leadership? Better yet, why have such Stalinists by nature, if they have any sense at all, and if they are not simply Stalinist agents in our ranks, why have they wasted their time in a small persecuted minority whose internal democracy has always been a model for the whole world? Why haven't they gone back to the Stalinist party where they would feel more at home? Such questions have never seriously arisen for the simple reason that Stalinist influence in our party has existed only in the imagination of people who have exaggerated its dangers and overlooked other and far greater dangers to which they themselves were yielding. The danger of degeneration in a revolutionary party comes from the pressure of its environment. The environment which our party has operated in, especially since our definitive break with the Comintern in 1933, is the bourgeois society in the strongest and richest of all bourgeois countries. This pressure has been real, not imaginary. It has claimed not a few victims in the past, and today, with the reaction engendered by the war, it presses against us more heavily than ever. If one is seriously looking for signs of, quote, degeneration, end quote, he should turn his attention in the direction of the real danger. He should quit babbling about Stalinism for a while and become more sensitive to evidences of weak-willed yielding to the powerful influences of the class enemy. Stalinism itself, properly understood, is not at all an independent force, but one of the forms of adaptation to the material and moral terror of the bourgeoisie, and thereby it is one of its agencies in the labor movement. There are other forms of adaptation and capitulation. We have had enough experience with them already to be able to identify them at first sight. In their finished form, they all seek to oppose a petty bourgeois program to the program of Bolshevism. But they almost invariably begin by revolting against its irreconcilable spirit and its organizational methods. Such tendencies, wherever they appear in the party, reveal the real danger of degeneration as unfailingly as the holes where water seeps through show the weak spots in a dike. Since the earliest days of our movement in the United States, nobody has gone over to Stalinism, but deserters to the camp of, quote, democratic, end quote, capitalism have been rather numerous. What is to be guarded against on the basis of this experience is any tendency of conciliationism towards these deserters in any stage of their degeneration. Such conciliationist tendencies are the real, not imaginary, quote, danger of degeneration in our ranks, end quote. Morrison rejects the idea that the party has the right and duty to be informed about and to regulate and control any and all relations which party members may have with political opponents. This idea, concretely demonstrated by the ruling in the case of the 4 New York comrades, impresses him as, quote, having a resemblance to Stalinist procedure, end quote. When the party leadership insists on strict rules in this regard, it indicates to Morrison only that, quote, the leadership thinks it is impermissible to discuss questions with members of the Workers' Party, end quote. That they lack pride and confidence in their ideas. In contrast to the party leadership's attitude toward opponent organizations, Morrison proceeds to lay down some rules of his own. Relating what his own practices have been, Morrison recommends them to the party members as a guide. Morrison sees nothing abnormal in a member of our organization shopping around at meetings and affairs of other political organizations, fraternizing with their members and discussing political questions with them, formally or informally, on their own responsibility. Whether such activity should be reported to the party or not, that, says Morrison, is up to the individual member to decide. On this point he again refers to Lenin and the Bolsheviks. It would have been better to leave Lenin out of it. Morrison's view of this matter is not new, to be sure, but it has no right to represent itself as a Leninist conception of normal relations between rival political organizations and their members. This question also has a history which apparently has made no impression on Morrison. The formulas Morrison offers would take us back to the primitive conceptions of party organization which dominated American labor radicalism before the First World War. That is, before the movement grew up and learned the meaning of a program and a party. It was precisely what we learned from Lenin that enabled us to discard those outmoded and entirely inadequate conceptions a full quarter of a century ago. And in this, as in so many other fields, experience corroborated Lenin's theory and in turn supplied it its own instructive lessons along the same line. Morrison's formulas contradict the theory and disregard the experience. Before the First World War, the dominating sentiment among the various social protest organizations and groups, despite all their differences and quarrels, was that of fraternity, the feeling of oneness, the opinion that all the groups were part of one and the same movement, and that all would, sooner or later, quote, get together, end quote. As a rule, a definite distinction was made between the terms, quote, organization and the, quote, movement. One's own particular organization, be it the Socialist Party, the IWW, any one of the numerous anarchist groups, local forums, or even a club of single taxers, bracket, followers of Henry George's program for a, quote, single tax, end quote, on land values to replace all others, end bracket, or an independent socialist educational society was thought of as a party. The quote movement, end quote, was the whole. It was a common practice for the quote radicals, end quote, of different affiliations to patronize others' meetings and affairs, to participate in common forums, reading clubs, and purely social organizations. In Kansas City and San Francisco, to my knowledge, quote, radical clubs, end quote, were deliberately organized to promote fraternization at monthly dinners. Radicals of all tendencies mingled socially and intermarried without thought of personal incompatibility arising from a conflict of ideas. Nor did the separate organizations draw sharp lines in their admittance of members. With the exception of De Leon's Socialist Labor Party, which stood aloof and with some justice regarded as intolerant and sectarian, they were all rather Catholic in their composition. Reformists and revolutionists, quote, ballot boxers, and, quote, direct actionists, end quote, belonged to one and the same socialist party. Christian socialists and professional Christ killers, prohibitionists, and partisans of the open saloon kept them company. The propaganda branches of the syndicalist IWW extended their hospitality alike to socialists and anarchists. Anarchism was thought by many to be more radical, more revolutionary than socialism, and anyone who was against, quote, authority was free to call himself an anarchist. Freelance radicals, whose name was Legion, were regarded as part of the, quote, movement on even terms with all the others. In Europe, the pre-war social democracy was a, quote, all-inclusive party, end quote. Unity was fetishized. The left wing shrank from the thought of split. Luxemburg and Liebknecht were party comrades with Kautsky, Noska, and Scheidemann. In Russia, Lenin resolutely carried through the split, bracket, between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, actually definitive only in 1912, end bracket, but Trotsky insisted on the unification of the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, bracket, he made a failed attempt at unification with a Congress in 1912, end bracket. The state of affairs in American labor radicalism prior to the First World War is related here, without intention either to praise or to blame. It was due to the circumstances of the time. The organizations in their membership composition and in their relations with each other could not rise above the level of their own understanding. This is the period of the infancy of the American Revolutionary Movement. Neither theory nor experience had yet taught us any better. The differences between the theories and tendencies in the respective organizations have not been fully thought out. None of the tendencies had yet been put to a great historic tests. Great events shattered this ideal. The war, and then the Russian Revolution, put all theories and tendencies to the test and drew them out to their ultimate conclusions. Reformist socialism was revealed as class treachery. Anarchism and syndicalism, with their, quote, denial, end quote, of the state, revealed their theoretical inadequacy, their bankruptcy, despite their grandiloquent revolutionary pretensions. Revolutionary Marxism, Bolshevism, alone stood up under the test of war and revolution. The Russian Bolsheviks taught us this in word and deed. The American militants learned from them, for the first time, the full meaning of the program and simultaneously the significance, the role of the vanguard party. The revolutionary workers of the whole world went to the same school. A worldwide realignment of forces began to take place under the impact of the war and the revolution. Lines were sharply drawn. Sentimental unification gave way to ruthless splits, and the splits became definitive, irreconcilable. The revolutionary militants, instructed by the war and the revolution, learned to counterpose the Marxist program to all other programs. Instructed by the precise teachings of Lenin, they learned the necessity of organizing their own party, separate and apart from all others, and to build it, not in fraternal tolerance of other parties, but in ruthless struggle against them. Once these ABC lessons were assimilated, and I repeat, we learned them 25 years ago, the revolutionary vanguard broke decisively with the old tradition of mishmash parties and loose coalitions, with freelance radicalism and the bohemian irresponsibility. In place of all of that, the organizational principles laid down by Lenin were adopted. Unity on the basis of a principled program. All devotion, all loyalty to one party and only one party. Strict responsibility and accountability of every member to the party. Professional leadership, democratic centralism. The pioneer American communists, and we, their heirs and continuators, have worked on these lines consistently and unswervingly since 1919. If our party stands today if our party stands today on far higher ground than that occupied by the amorphous and rebel workers' movement prior to the First World War, and that is indubitably the case, it is not due solely to the priority of our program, but also to the consistent application and practice of the principles and methods of Bolshevik organization. The experience of a quarter of a century has convinced us over and over again that this is the right way, the only way to build a revolutionary party. It is absurd to think that we can unwind the film of this experience and go back to where we started. But if Morrison's criticism and formulas mean anything seriously, that is what they mean. We cannot entertain any such propositions for a moment. In politics, nothing is more stupid, more infantile than to retrace ground that has already been covered, to go back and start all over again as if nothing had happened and nothing had been learned. Serious revolutionists must learn from every experience and apply what they have learned in new experiences. We insist on that. The new generation must not begin from the beginning. The fruit of the experience of the past, all that has been acquired and learned by others, is their heritage. They begin with that. Translated into terms of the, quote, organizational question, end quote. This means that they begin not from the prehistoric confusion of pre-war days, where Morrison's conceptions would take them, but from the more recent experiences in which our organizational principles and methods were tested in the great struggle against the petty bourgeois opposition in 1939 to 40. All the 40 years' experience of Bolshevism in organization as well as in theory and politics was recapitulated in that historic struggle. The new party recruits can learn about Bolshevism and Menshevism on the organization question by a study of the documents of this fight. It is not without interest to note that the party leadership, in the dispute over the incident of the New York membership meeting, shows its unqualified hostility to any sign of looseness or irresponsibility, to say nothing of disloyalty. In relations with the Menshevik traitor clique of Shachtman and Co., while Morrison, in his plea for unsupervised fraternization, manifests a more conciliatory attitude, on both sides here as always, the organizational method serves the political line. It's the end of this piece, which is labeled "The History of Bolshevism Can Be Found in Our Own Deeds" by James P. Cannon. And it was from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 10, November 1944. The next piece is labeled "Gross Sentimentality, Unbending Rigidity, Unfair Attacks," and it's by James T. Farrell. And it's a letter from July 30th, 1944, published in New International, November 1944. Dear friends and comrades, for some time I've been disturbed by two articles which have appeared in our pages. How the Trotskyists Went to Jail by Joseph Hansen, published February 1944, about the 18 Socialist Workers' Party members jailed in 1944 for sedition after the Minneapolis Smith Act trial of 1941, and A Defamer of Marxism by Harry Frankel, which I believe is Braverman. Oh yeah, it says that. May 1944, Braverman, this volume, page 393, end bracket. I have decided to send you this public protest against them. What is most lamentable in Joseph Hansen's article is the gross emotional reaction to events which it reveals. Such an attitude must be condemned. There are fine models of Marxist writing. There are other fine models of writing, such as the letters of Vanzetti. Instead of learning from these, it seems as if Hansen imitated the very worst of bourgeois journalism, the Sob Sisters. I cannot escape the conclusion that Hansen used the Marxist conception of history and the Marxist conception of morality as a means of mere sentimental personalization. If such is not the adulation of leadership, I do not know what it is. I admire the fine example which the 18 showed during this trial. I admire the 18 for the way in which they have preserved their morale while in jail. But this does not mean that I should adulate them, no more than I should have hoped for them or anyone else to adulate me for any reason whatsoever. I also wish strongly to object to the assertion that only the Trotskyists are moral. When party leaders and leading party journalists make such assertions in public, the time has come for such a party to turn a sharp lens of criticism on itself. Hanson's attitude can only create distorted images of reality. I consider it dangerous. The other criticism of Hanson's article is bad taste, his sloppiness, his bathos. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's pathos, supposed to be pathos, but it says bathos. Which one can make. These are secondary to its dangerous orientation. I deem it absolutely necessary to criticize that, the emotional reaction to events, and with it the emotional concept of history. I reject the theory of bureaucratic collectivism, but I consider that Harry Frankel's view of Max Shachtman can well be described as a literary apache work. I don't know. It was not principled in its arguments. It substituted vituperation for argument and analysis. In consequence, it destroyed the effect of the good points which it made. For instance, Frankel indicated that during the Finnish War, Max Shachtman used the low morale of the Red Army as one argument substantiating his position. Thereby, Shachtman established... For instance, Frankel indicated that during the Finnish War, Max Shachtman used the low morale of the Red Army as one argument substantiating his position. Thereby, he established morale as a criterion of argument. In consequence, it should be obligatory for him to explain the high morale of the Red Army in repulsing the Nazi invasion. But the fact that I agree with some of the points made by Frankel, Braverman, does not mean that I should defend his unfairness, his uncouth efforts to strip his adversary of all dignity, of all honor, all sincerity. I consider it highly objectionable to polemicize with shabby arguments, and that is precisely what Frankel did in this article. For instance, Frankel wrote that Shachtman had issued a, quote, new edition, end quote, of Trotsky's The New Course. Here is an innuendo which helps Frankel discredit Shachtman, to call him, in the manner of a fishwife, a black market charlatan. Now, where is the old edition of The New Course? Who sells it? When has it been advertised in your press? When I read this book, I immediately regretted that it had not been available sooner. I regretted in particular that it was not available during the period of the struggle against the Moscow trials. Among other things, this book contains a brilliant description of the methods of Leninism, one which I hope will be widely read. I hope Harry Frankel, Braverman, will read it again, for I am convinced that he has much to learn from it. Also, Harry Frankel, Braverman, asked an empty question as a means of discrediting his opponent. Issuing a challenge, Braverman asked why Max Shachtman did not republish The Revolution Betrayed. First of all, there's easy access to The Revolution Betrayed for all who want to read The Revolution Betrayed. Second, it is a known fact that the publication rights to this book are owned by Doubleday, Doran, and Co. If Max Shachtman published it, he would undoubtedly be faced with a lawsuit. And if that happened, I am rather sure that Frankel, Braverman, or one of his comrades who was equally rigid in attitude, would then write of this lawsuit in order to prove the low morals of Max Shachtman. When one indulges in such cheap arguments, what moral right has one to call anybody a black market merchant in tripe? Why ask empty questions as a means of destroying the character of an adversary? Also, Harry Frankel Braverman would have us believe that in the United States, Max Shachtman has abandoned the Marxist conception of a trade union. In other words, that he's a scab and a strikebreaker. I wonder who will believe that. And while he indulges in such miserable means of refutation, Frankel Braverman is at the same time guilty of one serious omission. Trotsky conceded that it might happen that history will prove Bruno to have been correct, and that if this turns out to be the case, then Marxists will have to reorient themselves totally. But Trotsky added, he was not convinced that events had, as yet, justified Bruno, and that therefore it was wrong for Marxists to abandon their program. The concession was a very important one. Frankel should have discussed it. It would have been more important to have it discussed than to have wasted space in the cheapest of abuse. The fact that I reject Max Shachtman's acceptance of the theory of bureaucratic collectivism does not, in my eyes, justify me in approving of unfair, unprincipled, utterly unjust attacks upon Max Shachtman and his character. I consider such methods to be unworthy of Marxism. I am, as is well known, not a member of your party, but I have collaborated with you on defense cases. I have expressed sympathy with you. On more than one occasion, I have made it clear to Max Shachtman and his collaborators that I did not agree with the theory of bureaucratic collectivism. The fact that I have done this causes me to feel all the more imperatively that it is my duty to send you this protest. Also, I admire the organized will which your party has shown. I admire your spirit of optimism and confidence. I admire the many examples of dedication to ideals and sacrifice for superpersonal loyalties which your party has displayed. But none of these virtues can in any way excuse the Frankel attack. I am fearful that if articles such as these two continue to appear, the only effect will be that of working harm, not good. Gross sentimentality, unbending rigidity, unfair attacks on opponents, these are all dangerous. I hold them to be indefensible. Fraternally yours, James T. Farrell, July 30th, 1944. And again, this piece was labeled Gross Sentimentality, Unbending Rigidity, Unfair Attacks by James T. Farrell, 1944. This piece being originally published in New International, November 1944. The next piece is labeled We Should Make Revisionists Hateful by Harry Braverman. It's from 1944 and is from a piece titled Comments on the Letter from James T. Farrell under the pen name Harry Frankel, Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 8, October 1944. I should like to bring a few points to the attention of the party in connection with the letter of James T. Farrell objecting to two articles in our press. Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 6. I need deal only with the attacks on our review of Shachtman's book, The Struggle for the New Course, that appeared in the Fourth International, the journal. If the charges against the review of Shachtman's book are reduced to their essence, they constitute an accusation of demagogy. It should be made absolutely clear that we reject such methods of struggle. We reject demagogy because the demagogue disarms the party, depriving the party of the proper principled arguments, which are the weapons of Marxists. The demagogue provides us with treacherous weapons which will explode in our hands at the first encounter. That is why the demagogue is the enemy of the party. Our press is written and edited with that injunction in mind. The review of Shachtman's book is no exception. Not one word of the review need be altered to make it comply with the requirements of principled polemic. As for the harshness of the quote attack, end quote, any improvement that the article requires, and it could stand many, would be in the direction of increasing the hostility and irreconcilability of our attack against this most recent and least original school of revisionism as presented by Shachtman. I have read and reread Farrell's letter with care, but I cannot find in it any support for Farrell's attack on the review. Farrell apparently read the review with his political eye closed and his subjective emotional eye open. That is the only way I can interpret his avoidance of the main political points of the article, and preoccupation with secondary insignificant points. For example, the review opens with the point that, in his edition of the new course, Shachtman makes an unprincipled attempt to use Trotsky's writings as a vehicle for an anti-Trotskyist, anti-Marxist position on the Soviet Union. What other significance can the linking of Trotsky and Shachtman in one volume have? But Farrell detours just before coming to this point and attacks us wildly for referring to a, quote, new, end quote, edition of the new course, construing this in some way as an attack on Shachtman for publishing a pirated edition of the book. If Farrell will permit me to explain, to publish the new course is no crime. To publish it together with Shachtman's attack on Trotskyism is charlatanism. Farrell makes a similar detour on his second point. In our review, we developed the point that Shachtman, in writing about the Trotskyist position on the Soviet Union, chose as his springboard one of the very few of Trotsky's writings on the Russian question, which could not be political, and even by chronological necessity. Parenthesis, it was written in 1923, end parenthesis. Present the Trotskyist analysis of the Soviet Union. We point out that Shachtman should attempt to refute the revolution betrayed, or the Soviet Union and the Fourth International, or even to review in defense of Marxism, which Shachtman has never done. Farrell seizes upon our mention of the revolution betrayed with the shout that Shachtman could not republish the revolution betrayed, since the publication rights are owned by a bourgeois firm. Copyrights are not involved in this matter. How can Farrell replace the main political point with such a technicality? If Shachtman undertakes to revise Trotsky's analysis of the Soviet Union, it is incumbent upon Shachtman to answer the main works dealing with that analysis and take them as his point of departure. Farrell might have noticed that we mentioned two others of Trotsky's writings in addition to The Revolution Betrayed. One of them was published by us recently. All Shachtman needed to do is review it. We are told that Shachtman is prevented from applying to Trotsky's analysis of the Soviet Union as it is presented in his many books, articles, and resolutions because ... Doubleday Duran holds publication rights to one of them. No, that is false. Shachtman's sidestepping on this matter is part of his renegacy, his desire to hide behind Trotsky's name while betraying Trotsky's ideas as so many renegades before him have attempted to do with Marx and Lenin. Our point here is scrupulously principled and exposes the Shachtmanite unprincipledness. I must say that I read with indignation Farrell's misinterpretation of the view in his third point. Let me repeat his words. Quote, also, Harry Frankel Braverman would have us believe that in the United States Max Shachtman has abandoned the Marxist conception of a trade union. In other words, that he is a scab and a strikebreaker. I wonder who will believe that, end quote. How can Farrell give this false twist to our characterization of Shachtman's venture into the field of the trade union analogy? The review says nothing of this sort. It is clearly stated that Shachtman adopts a, quote, ultra-leftist, end quote, criterion for the trade union movement to justify Shachtman's arbitrary normative method in determining the nature of the Soviet Union. If the Shachtmanites are scabs and strikebreakers, thus far it is in relation to the Soviet Union. Piling one final error on all the others, Farrell adds that Trotsky made a, quote, important concession, end quote, to Bruno, Shachtman's revisionist predecessor. Trotsky conceded, he says, that history, quote, might prove Bruno to have been correct, end quote, in his theory of bureaucratic collectivism, and I should have discussed this, but Trotsky discussed it himself, denying categorically that he had made any new, quote, concessions, end quote. He explains this fully, pointing out that, quote, Marxists had formulated an incalculable number of times the alternatives, either socialism or a return to barbarism, end quote. The claim that Trotsky had made concessions to the Bruno-type notions, concessions which amounted to a, quote, revision, end quote, of Marxism, was one of the innumerable phantasmagoria conjured up by the Shachtmanites during the factional struggle of 1939 to 40. Answering them, Trotsky wrote, quote, if we are to speak of a revision of Marx, it is in reality the revision of those comrades who project a new type of state, non-bourgeois, non-worker, because the alternative developed by me leads them to draw their own thoughts up to their logical conclusion. Some of these critics, frightened by the conclusions of their own theory, accuse me, ... of revising Marxism. I prefer to think that it is simply a friendly jest, end quote. It is Shachtman who makes all the concessions to the Bruno-type notions that Trotsky discussed. We bear no responsibility whatsoever for that. Such are the points upon which Farrell bases his many epithets against the review. Those who can find a basis for all his epithets in his arguments could also succeed in erecting a building on sand piles. Such serious charges demand more serious proof. Among the most amazing aspects of Farrell's letter is his interpretation of our branding Shachtmanism for what it is as an attempt to besmirch Shachtman's, quote, personal character, end quote. Quote, unjust attacks on Shachtman and Shachtman's character, end quote. Quote, strip his adversary of all ... sincerity, end quote, are among Farrell's comments. We can assure Farrell that there are very few things that interest me less than Shachtman's, quote, character. There is not one argument in the review that is not aimed at the political position and political methodology of the Shachtmanites. Can it be that his too personal view of the polemic caused Farrell to miss the main political points? We fear that is what happened. For non-political personal denigration, Farrell will have to consult the writings of Shachtman. In answering my review, this poor slandered character makes reference more than once to my youth, an indubitable fault, but one which I hope to correct in time. Will Farrell write a letter protesting such arguments, quote, ad hominem, end quote. Farrell advised me to reread Trotsky's new course in order to learn more about the, quote, methods of Leninism, end quote. Parenthesis, how can Farrell forget that Trotsky characterized Shachtmanism as the review did, only far more harshly, end parenthesis. I, as well as all of us, have much to learn in this field, but I can assure Farrell that, study as I may, I will not find conciliationism towards revisionist among the methods of Leninism. During the early days of the Comintern, Trotsky once wrote in July 1920 the following words of advice to a young French party that had the problem of dealing with a revisionist grouping. Quote, a split is a very, very serious matter, and once we have recognized the inevitability of a split, it is necessary that the masses should understand its full significance. It is necessary mercilessly to expose the policies of the dissidents, parenthesis, the minority followers of Longuet, who split in 1919, Harry Frankel Braverman, in parenthesis. It is necessary to make their leaders and their press ludicrous and hateful in the eyes of the masses, end quote. Not a, quote, comradely discussion, end quote, but a ruthless struggle. Not a polite polemic, but a head-on attack to make the opponents, quote, ludicrous and hateful, end quote. Such was Trotsky's advice. Are these not authentic words of advice as to the methods of Leninism? There is no more Leninist way to deal with splitters and revisionists. Again, this piece was labeled, We Should Make Revisionist Hateful, by Harry Braverman, 1944. It originally came from a piece titled Comments on the Letter from James T. Farrell, written under the pen name Harry Frankel, Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 8, October 1944. The next piece is titled An Arbitrary Factional Self-Serving Attitude by Albert Goldman, 1944. This piece is from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 6, October 1944. September 3rd, 1944. The following information has reached me, bracket. Goldman was in jail at the time, end bracket. Jim Farrell wrote a letter to the Fourth International criticizing the Hansen article and Frankel's review of the new course. For about a month, Jim received no word as to whether or not his letter would be published. Then someone told him that the questions raised in his letter would be discussed in the pre-convention period. It was not made clear whether Jim's letter would be published in toto, even in the bracket internal Socialist Workers' Party members only, end bracket bulletin. I gather that Jim is disturbed at the refusal of the Fourth International to publish his letter and would like my advice. I must in the first place state that from the excerpts I have read, I consider the letter as one from a loyal friend of the party, whose main interest in writing it is to call attention to a type of article which he disapproves and considers harmful to the party. As a friend of the party, there is nothing for him to do except to bring the matter to the attention of the party membership. In this way, he will act as a party member whose right and duty it is to bring to the membership any decision of a higher body which he considers to be a serious error, and hope that the error will be corrected. You can tell him that I shall try my best to get the whole question before the membership. September 4th, 1944. The membership should carefully consider the significance of the political committee's refusal to publish James T. Farrell's letter to the Fourth International, in which he criticizes the Hansen article and Frankel's review of the new course. A valuable lesson can be learned from the refusal to publish Farrell's letter. Once a mistake is made and obstinately adhered to, other mistakes are almost certain to follow. A problem not solved correctly is almost certain to lead to further problems. A mistake was made when Hanson's article was published. That mistake could have been easily rectified if Morrison's letter answering MacDonald had been published. The refusal to publish Morrison's (i.e. Goldman's own) letter, which in all probability would have ended the discussion on the Hanson article, has now placed us in an absurd position of refusing to publish a letter of criticism from a friend of the party. The mere fact that a problem has arisen by virtue of Farrell's sending the Fourth International a friendly letter criticizing 2 articles shows that there is something wrong in the attitude of the people who make the decision as to what to publish and what not to publish. A party would never be confronted with a problem because the receipt of a letter of criticism from a friend, if the people in charge of the publications would make correct decisions as to the material that should be or should not be published, such a letter would be published as a matter of course. If the author is wrong, an answer would be forthcoming showing wherein he is wrong. If the author is correct, an admission of his correctness would end the matter. Are we dealing here with a situation where an opponent of the party, disagreeing with its basic principles, writes a letter or an article against party policy? Are we, in other words, dealing with a situation where an opponent wants to utilize our press for the presentation of his views, which are antagonistic to ours? The answer must, of course, be an unhesitating and emphatic no. We are confronted by an altogether different situation, where a friend of the party writes a letter of criticism with reference to articles that do not involve party policy. There can be no doubt whatever amongst those who know Farrell and his attitude to our party that he is friendly to the party. It is clear from the letter itself that it is written by a friend who does not approve the contents and tone of the 2 articles, who thinks that those articles are harmful to the party and wants to call attention to that fact. To designate such a letter as unfriendly to the party is completely arbitrary and can convince no reasoning person. For the party, it is not primarily a question of what Farrell and others will think of our refusal to publish a critical letter from a friend. It is a question of correct procedure to follow in such cases. It is a question of creating confidence in our own ranks that we fear no criticism because we can answer any adverse criticism or admit that adverse criticism's correctness. The membership should demand the publication of Farrell's letter. Again, this piece was labeled An Arbitrary, Factional, Self-Serving Attitude by Albert Goldman, 1944, published in Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 6, Number 6, October 1944. The next piece is by James P. Cannon and is labeled Criticisms by Intellectual Amateurs is an Insult to the Party. This piece comes from the Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin Number 7, Volume 7, Number 2, April 1945. September 3rd, 1944. Volume 7. Yeah. Okay. Shit. I keep skipping the wrong page. Okay. Criticisms by intellectual amateurs is an insult to the party. James P. Cannon. The leaders of the opposition showed a great deal of disregard for the opinions and sentiment of the party membership. Perhaps the worst manifestation was the demand that James T. Farrell's letter be published. The attempt to impose his pompous strictures on the party as some kind of authority which the party was bound to recognize. That was, of course, a coarse and brutal insult to the party. The party could not be a party if it had not learned to rely on itself and to reject out of hand every suggestion of guidance from outside sources. We learn and correct our mistakes through mutual discussion and criticism among ourselves. We Leninists have studied the art of revolutionary politics and organization, and our decisions receive the constant corrective of the workers' mass movement. We work at it every day. Such individuals as James T. Farrell, whose main interest and occupation lie in other fields, haven't yet started even to think about it seriously. James T. Farrell's banal letter alone is sufficient proof of that. Before he or anyone like him can presume to teach us, he must himself first go to school. We take our ideas and our work far too seriously to welcome instruction from people who haven't the slightest idea of what they're talking about, who mistake vague impressions and philosophical prejudices for professional competence. It is remarkable how politics lures the amateur. Every other art and science, every profession and occupation has its own recognized body of knowledge and its own rules and standards which amateurs and laymen respect from a distance and take for granted. People who don't know the business do not presume to lay down the law to those who do. Neither James T. Farrell nor anyone else who didn't wish to make himself ridiculous would ever dream of intruding, with a ponderous air of authority at that, on a discussion among practitioners of another art or profession outside the field of his own special study and experience. But in the art of revolutionary politics and organization, which is not the least difficult nor the least important of the arts, since its aim is to change the world, any dabbler feels free to pontificate without the slightest sign of serious preparation. Dwight MacDonald is the archetype of these political Alices in Wonderland, but Farrell, as the most cursory reading of his childish letters shows, is not much closer to the real world. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't prevent such people from committing their half-baked notions to paper as soon as they pop into their heads and then waiting for the earth to quake. But we have people in our ranks, worse yet in our leadership, who excitedly demand that we set aside our rules and suspend our business to listen to these preposterous oracles and even to heed their revelations. We should in all conscience object to that. That is downright offensive. We now learn that James T. Farrell's letter has finally found its place in Shackman's magazine. That is where it belonged in the first place. January 16th, 1945. That's the end of that piece, which again was labeled Criticisms by Intellectual Amateurs and Insult to the Party by James P. Cannon, published in Socialist Workers' Party Internal Bulletin, Volume 7, Number 2, April 1945. The next piece is called Zinoviev, A Great Hero, by James P. Cannon. This is from 1955, so we're jumping a number of years ahead here. This is a letter to Theodore Draper from the 26th of July, 1955, from the first 10 years of American communism. I was greatly influenced by Zinoviev in the early days of the Comintern, as were all communists throughout the world. I've never forgotten that Zinoviev was Lenin's closest collaborator in the years of reaction and during the First World War, that Zinoviev was the foremost orator of the revolution, according to the testimony of Trotsky, and that he was the chairman of the Comintern in the Lenin-Trotsky time. It was Zinoviev's block with Trotsky and his expulsion along with Trotsky that first really shook me up and started the doubts and discontents which eventually led me to Trotskyism. I've always been outraged by the impudent pretensions of so many little people to deprecate Zinoviev, and I feel that Zinoviev deserves justification before history, In the exigencies of the political struggle, it has not been convenient for the Trotskyist movement to make a full and objective evaluation of Zinoviev's life, and others have shown no interest in Zinoviev's life. But historical justice cries out for it, and it will be done sometime by somebody. In spite of all, Zinoviev deserves restoration as one of the great hero martyrs of the revolution. Again, this piece was labeled Zinoviev, A Great Hero, and it's from a letter to Theodore Draper, 26th of July, 1955, from the first 10 years of American communism. The next piece is titled Zinovievist, I Learned from Trotsky. This is from James P. Cannon, 1945, and is originally published as an excerpt, at least, from a piece titled A Reply to Goldman in 3 Points from the 7th of October, 1945, in the struggle for socialism in the, quote, American century. Now the second point is about Zinoviev. You know, I have always had a practice for 20 years in the movement of making very few answers to personal attacks, because I always have the good luck to have so many personal attacks made against me that if I took time to answer all of them, I would never have time to get down to the issues in dispute, never get to the meat of the situation, ... But this question about Zinoviev I want to answer briefly because I think it has some historic importance. Zinoviev was not one man. There were 4 Zinovievs at least. I would say there were 6 Zinovievs. There was the Zinoviev who was the most intimate collaborator of Lenin in exile during the war, who did great historic work. Then there was the Zinoviev who, together with Kamenev, lost his nerve on the eve of the October 1917 and insurrection. ... Then there was the Zinoviev who corrected himself after that, who became the chairman of the Comintern and Lenin's agent, really in leading the Comintern. All the great worldwide propaganda against Zinovievism and Zinoviev was set in motion by the group of centrists who were attracted to the Comintern in its first years and recoiled from the Comintern in the Comintern's first years under Lenin. Balabanov and others of that sort, who gave to the whole organization and method of Lenin, the organization of the Comintern, the 21 points, they gave the name of Zinoviev, making it synonymous with Leninism. When anybody waves the flag of Zinovievism, you can do well to trace it back to which Zinoviev they mean. ... Then there was a 4th Zinoviev, the Zinoviev of the Troika with Stalin and Kamenev after the death of Lenin. This is the Zinoviev who began to backslide, and it is correct, as Goldman said, that the organizational methods that began to be introduced into the Comintern, in contradistinction to the earlier years, were sort of a bridge toward Stalinism. Not Stalinism by a long way, but a bridge toward a beginning of the bureaucratism. In that period, Zinoviev was chairman of the Comintern. All the most influential pronouncements and articles coming from Moscow came in the name of Zinoviev. He was the leader of the 5th Congress. The writings of the left opposition under Trotsky were suppressed. We got only faint snatches of them here and there, and I, like every other leader of the American Party in those days, could be said to be a Zinovievist. We were taken in by that campaign of the Troika. In that time, the campaign 21 years ago, when my sin is cited, I would say it would be very safe to say, at that time, I was a Zinovievist in the sense that every other leader of the party was, in the sense that they were taking for good coin the whole line from Moscow and not examining it too critically. But then there is another Zinoviev, the 5th Zinoviev, who in 1926-27 broke away from the bloc with Stalin and concluded a bloc with Trotsky and made as one of the issues of his campaign ... the demand for party democracy. Now, I was not a Trotsky Zinovievist in that period, but I began, as I recounted in my history, to be very disturbed about that question. But I didn't become a Trotskyist until 1928, and that was when the bloc of Trotsky and Zinoviev had been broken, and the 6th Zinoviev, the capitulator, appeared and went back to the camp of Stalinism. And I, on the other hand, supported Trotsky. I didn't support Zinoviev number 6. My re-education on all principles of Marxism, including party organization, took place under the tutelage of Trotsky from 1928 on. And if you blame me for having been a sort of Zinovievist for the period of 1924 to 25, you have to find me, I think, one of my accusers who is wiser. I don't know that the organizational and political views of Goldman were at that time. I don't know what the organizational and political views of Goldman were at that time, as I am not familiar with Goldman's writings at that period. Parenthesis, as far as I know, he was end parenthesis, supporter of the official line and swallowed it whole, but I became a Trotskyist, and it might be said in exculpation of the sin that is alleged against me, I was the first leader of American Trotskyism to become a Trotskyist, and I think that should counterbalance, and I remained a Trotskyist since 1928 up to the present. It's the end of that piece, which was labeled Zinovievist, I Learned from Trotsky, by James P. Cannon, 1945. This is from a piece titled A Reply to Goldman in 3 Points, published the 7th of October, 1945, in the Struggle for Socialism in the, quote, American Century, end quote. Don't Strangle the Party is the name of is the label of the next piece. It's by James P. Cannon, 1966. This says it's a letter to Reba Hansen, parenthesis, partner of Joseph Hansen, end parenthesis, with copy to Ed Shaw, parenthesis, organization secretary of the Socialist Workers' Party at the time, end parenthesis, 12th of November 1966, from a pamphlet entitled Don't Strangle the Party, published in 1986 by the Fourth Internationalist Tendency, parenthesis, Trotskyist expelled from the Socialist Workers' Party, which was by then Castro-led, end parenthesis. Okay, so Don't Strangle the Party, James P. Cannon, 1966. As far as I can see, all the new moves and proposals to monkey with the Constitution, which has served the party so well in the past with the aim of, quote, tightening, end quote, centralization, represent a trend in the wrong direction at the present time. The party, parenthesis, and the YSA, bracket, the Socialist Workers' Party's youth group, end bracket, end parenthesis, is too, quote, tight, end quote, already. And if we go much further along this line, we can run the risk of strangling the party to death, dot, dot, dot. I am particularly concerned about any possible proposal to weaken the constitutional provision about the absolute right of suspended or expelled members to appeal to the convention. That is clearly and plainly a provision to protect every party member against possible abuse of authority by the National Committee. It should not be abrogated and diluted just to show that we are so damn revolutionary that we make no concessions to, quote, bourgeois concepts of checks and balances, end quote. The well-known Bill of Rights is a check and balance which I hope will be incorporated, in large part at least, in the Constitution of the Workers' Republic in this country. Our constitutional provision for the right of appeal is also a, quote, check and balance, end quote. It can help to recommend our party to revolutionary workers as a genuinely democratic organization which guarantees rights as well as imposing responsibilities, and thus make it more appealing to them. I believe that these considerations have more weight now than ever before in the 38-year history of our party. In the present political climate, and with the present changing composition of the party, democratic centralism must be applied flexibly. At least 90% of the emphasis should be placed on the democratic side and not on any crackpot schemes to, quote, streamline, end quote, the party to the point where questions are unwelcome and criticism and discussion stifled. That is a prescription to kill the party before it gets a chance to show how it can handle and assimilate an expanding membership of new young people, who don't know it all to start with, but have to learn and grow in the course of explication and discussion in a free democratic atmosphere. Trotsky once remarked in a polemic against Stalinism that even in the period of the Civil War, discussion in the party was, quote, boiling like a spring, end quote. Those words and others like it written by Trotsky in his first attack against Stalinism in the New Course ought to be explained now once again to the new young recruits in our party, and the best way to explain such a decisive thing is to practice what you preach. Again, this piece was labeled Don't Strangle the Party by James P. Cannon, 1966. And it was from a pamphlet entitled Don't Strangle the Party, published in 1986 by the Fourth Internationalist Tendency, parenthesis, Trotskyist expelled from the Socialist Workers' Party, which was by then Castro-led, end parenthesis. If you're curious, look up the videos I have on American Trotskyism by Robert J. Alexander on this channel, especially the later pieces, which talk about the transformation of the Socialist Workers' Party from a Trotskyist organization into a Castro-led organization. Alright. The next piece is from 1924 and is labeled The Bolshevization of the Party, and it's by James P. Cannon. This is a speech of the 5th of October, 1924, published in The Workers' Monthly, November 1924, reprinted in James P. Cannon and the Early Years of American Communism, Selected Writings and Speeches, 1920 to 1928. The founding of the Workers' Party School in New York City has a great significance for the party and must be regarded as a real achievement. Bracket, this is the Workers' Party, which was the legal name of the early Communist Party USA, not the post-1940 Workers' Party, end bracket. It is one of many signs that the American Communist movement, which already has 5 years of struggle behind it, is hammering itself into shape, overcoming its weaknesses, striving in real earnestness to throw off the encumbrances which it inherited from the past and to transform itself into a genuine party of Leninism. We are well aware that our party is not yet a Bolshevik party in the complete sense of the term, but we can say that after 5 years we have succeeded in crystallizing at least a strong nucleus within the party which endeavors to adopt a real Leninist standpoint on every question which confronts the party. It is characteristic of such comrades that they regard the adherence of our party to the Communist International not as a formal affair but as an inseparable part of its being, which shapes and colors all its activities, something that penetrates into the very marrow of its bones. For them, the world of the Communist International is decisive in all party questions. It is as one of such comrades that I wish to speak here tonight. The 5th Congress of the Communist International, June 17th to July 8th, 1924, end bracket, has completed its work. It has examined and appraised the world situation. It has gone deeply into the experiences of all the most important parties during the period since the 4th Congress, November 5th to December 5th, 1922, end bracket, as well as into the work of the International as a whole. The judgment finally arrived at has been compressed into a series of resolutions and theses which are now available for the communist parties of the entire world. They constitute a clear guide for our future activities. The Congress found that all the parties of the International, with the exception of the Russian Party, are still far short of the requirements of a Bolshevik party. The traditions, customs, and habits of the past are like leaden weights on their feet. They lack the Bolshevik discipline, the iron hardness, the capacity for decisive action, the mobile form of organization, and the strong theoretical foundation which a party of Leninism must have. The Congress demanded an energetic struggle against all these weaknesses and defects, and the slogan of this struggle is, quote, the Bolshevization of the party, exclamation point, end quote. Our educational work, as well as all other phases of our party life, must be carefully scrutinized and examined in the light of this slogan. When we come to speak of theory and theoretical work, we put our finger at once on one of the weakest spots in the American movement. This has always been the case. The American labor movement, in common with the labor movements of practically all the Anglo-Saxon countries, has a traditional indifference to theory. There is a widespread tendency to draw a line between theory and practice. The typical labor leader boasts of being a practical man who has no time for theory, end quote. We encounter the same point of view quite often even in the ranks of our party. Such a tendency is bound to lead the party into a blind alley. We must fight against it in a determined and organized manner. The party educational work must be organized in a systematic way and pushed forward with tenfold energy. Our educational work up now has been practically negligible, and that is all the more reason for making haste now. In connection with this work, it is necessary continually to stress the fundamental importance of revolutionary theory. Comrade Lenin said, quote, without a revolutionary theory, a revolutionary movement is impossible, end quote. These words must become part of the consciousness of every member of the party. It must become obvious to all that the working class will be able to come into open collision with the capitalist order, to dismantle it and set up in its place the communist form of society, to accomplish the task which history has set for it, only if at every turn of the road, in every phase of the struggle, it is guided by a correct revolutionary theory. The spectacle is familiar to all of us, of militant workers starting out with a great hatred of capitalist oppression and a will to fight against it, but drifting along because of lack of knowledge of the capitalist system and of the means by which it may be overthrown, into a policy which leads them to actual support of the capitalist system. The participation of many thousands of discontented workers in the La Follette movement is an instance of this. U.S. Senator Robert La Follette, a maverick Republican of the type of Theodore Roosevelt and the, quote, progressives, end quote, set up his own, quote, progressive party, end quote, and ran for president in 1924, end bracket. We know that the typical labor leaders of America who say that they have no theory carry out in actual practice the theory of the bourgeoisie and constitute strong pillars of support for the bourgeois system. There's no such thing as, quote, no theory, end quote, in the labor movement. Two social systems are in conflict with each other, the capitalist system and the communist. One must be guided either by the theory of revolution which leads to the communist order of society, or he will follow a line of action which leads to support of the present order. That is to say that, in effect, he adapts himself to the theory of the present order. Quote, no theory, end quote, in the labor movement is the theory of the bourgeoisie. Without revolutionary theory, the workers, even with the best will in the world, cannot fight the capitalist system successfully. This statement holds good not merely in the question of the final revolutionary struggle for power. It applies equally in every aspect of the daily struggle. Workers have no understanding of the theory of revolution. Who have no understanding of the theory of revolution cannot follow a consistent line of action that leads toward it. Behind every action aimed at the bourgeoisie, there must be the theory of the revolutionary overthrow of the bourgeoisie. False policies in the ranks of the workers, whereby even their own goodwill and energy is transformed into a force operating against their own interests, spring in the first place from false theory. Only by an understanding of the revolutionary nature of their struggle, and of the necessity of shaping their actions in the light of this theory, and adapting them to the execution of it, can the workers follow a systematic policy of opposition to the bourgeoisie, and of defense of their own interests. Revolutionary theory is not something separate from action, but is the guiding principle of all revolutionary action. The Fifth Congress of the Communist International dealt with the mistakes made by various sections during the period between the Fourth and Fifth Congresses, which in the case of the German Party led to most disastrous results, and laid these mistakes at the door of incorrect theory, of deviation from the line of Marxism and Leninism. It declared that both the opportunistic errors of the right and the sectarian errors of the left represent deviations from the line of the Communist International, which is the embodiment of the theory of Marx and Lenin. The crisis in the German Communist Party, which became evident at the time of the October 1923 retreat, was declared by the Fifth Congress to be the result of the influence of the remnants of the old social democratic ideology which still existed within the Communist Party of Germany. This also applies to our party, and the remedy for this state of affairs, in the language of the propaganda thesis of the Fifth Congress, is to, quote, Bolshevize the party, end quote. The propaganda thesis says, the Bolshevization of the party in this sense means the final ideological victory of Marxism and Leninism, or in other words, of Marxism in the period of imperialism and the epoch of proletarian revolution, and to reject the Marxism of the Second International and the remnants of the elements of syndicalism. The Bolshevization of the party, therefore, like all slogans of the Communist International, means not a mechanical formula but a struggle. In this case, it is a struggle against false ideology in the party. The Bolshevization of the party for us means the struggle for the conquest of the party for the ideology of Marxism and Leninism. To quote again from the thesis, quote, the complete and rapid Bolshevizing of the communist parties can be obtained in the process of the deliberate revolutionary activity of the sections of the Communist International, by more deeply hammering Marxism and Leninism into the consciousness of the communist parties and the party members, end quote. The Bolshevization of the party is a process, and the means towards the end is an ideological struggle. The workers' school, in common with all educational institutions set up by the party, must be a weapon for this struggle. Under no circumstances can we conceive of it as a neutral academy standing between the various tendencies and currents of the party, but as a fighting instrument against all deviations both to the right and to the left, and for the overcoming of the confusion of the party members, and for the, quote, hammering into the consciousness of the party and party members of Marxism and Leninism, end quote. This conception imposes gigantic tasks upon the workers' school. There is much confusion in our ranks. This we must all admit frankly. Such a state of affairs is to be expected in a party which up to now has devoted little attention to theoretical work and which has had little revolutionary experience, but we must begin now in a determined fashion to cope with this condition and to overcome it. A particularly dangerous form of confusion and irresponsibility, which we must conquer by frontal attack without delay, is the formal and even frivolous attitude which is sometimes manifested in regard to the relations of our party and our party members to the Communist International. We hear the Bolshevization of the party spoken of here and there as though it were a joke, not to be taken seriously. The very utterance of such a sentiment is in itself an evidence of theoretical weakness. Communists cannot take such a light-hearted attitude towards the Communist International. Let us say at the very beginning and let everybody understand once and for all, the international organization of the revolutionary proletariat and the leadership of the World Congress is in itself an inseparable part of our theory. The very fact that any party members are able to regard the slogan of the Fifth Congress as a joke is a great proof of the need for this slogan in our party. If we examine closely the state of affairs within our party now, and for the 5 years that it has been in existence, we are bound to come to the conclusion, as did the Fifth Congress in regard to the International as a whole, that the internal conflicts and crises, as well as the mistakes made by the party in the field of its external activities, can be traced directly to ideological weakness, to the incomplete assimilation by the party of Marxism and Leninism. In other words, it still carries with it the dead weight of the past and has not yet become a Bolshevik party. The thesis of tactics of the Fifth Congress lays down 5 separate specifications which are the special features of a really Bolshevik party. One of them is the following, quote, "It, parenthesis, a Bolshevik party, end parenthesis, must be a centralized party prohibiting factions, tendencies, and groups. It must be a monolithic party hewn of one piece," end quote. I want to repeat that because one is the following. That's really important. Quote, "It, parenthesis, a Bolshevik party, end parenthesis, must be a centralized party prohibiting factions, tendencies, and groups. It must be a monolith party hewn of one piece," end quote. What shall we say of our party if we measure by this standard? From the very beginning and even to the present day, our party has been plagued with factions, tendencies, and groups. At least one half of the energy of the party has been expended in factional struggles, another one after another. We have even grown into the habit of accepting this state of affairs as a normal condition. We have gone to the extent of putting a premium upon factionalism by giving factional representation in the important committees of the party. Of course, this condition cannot be eliminated by formal decree. We cannot eliminate factions and factional struggles by declaring them undesirable. No, we shall make the first step towards eliminating factions, tendencies, and groups towards creating a monolithic party in the sense of the Fifth Congress Declaration, only if at the beginning we recognize the basic cause of the condition. If we recognize that the existence in our party of factions, tendencies, and groups runs directly counter to Leninism, to the Leninist conception of what a revolutionary proletarian party should be. Then we will proceed in true Leninist fashion to overcome the difficulty, not mechanically, not by organizational measures alone, but by an ideological and political struggle which has for its object the creation of a uniform and consistent proletarian class ideology in the party ranks. The problem of factions, tendencies, and groups is not an organizational problem merely. It is a political problem, and for political problems there are no mechanical solutions. We must conceive of the workers' school as one of the best weapons in our hands for the fight to develop a uniform proletarian ideology in the party ranks and to overcome all deviations from it. The American Revolutionary movement has had in the past, and still has in many sections, even in a section of the party, queer and false conceptions of the nature of revolutionary education. We are all acquainted with that class of, quote, educators, end quote, who reduce education to the study of books and separate the study of books from the conduct of the daily struggle. We know of that old school of, quote, educators, end quote, whom we used to call the, quote, surplus value, end quote, school, who imagine that if a worker learns something of the nature of the capitalist system of society, the process by which it exploits him and by which it expropriates the major product of his labor, then his education is complete. We have no place for such a static and one-sided conception of revolutionary education. In all our work, the analysis of capitalist society and the study of the mechanics of capitalist exploitation must be directly and originally connected with the Marxian theory of the state and the process by which the proletariat will overthrow it and set up their own order of society. We must give short shrift to those pseudo-Marxists who convert Marxism into a, quote, theory, end quote, separate from struggle. According to our conceptions, Marxism and Leninism constitute both the theory and practice of the proletarian revolution, and it is in this sense that the workers' school must teach Marxism and must impart it to the students of the school. Genuine Leninist education cannot by any means be separated from the daily activities and the daily struggles of the party. It must be organically connected with these struggles. No one can become a real Leninist if he studies in a glass case. We must discourage, and the workers' school must fight with all its means against any such conception. Correct revolutionary education is partisan education. It must bear the stamp of Marx and Lenin and no other stamp. Only the theory and teachings of Marxism and Leninism are revolutionary. They cannot be harmonized with any other theory, for no other theory is revolutionary. The workers' school cannot be natural or tolerant. The workers' school must scrutinize 10 times over every item in its curriculum, and every utterance of its instructors from the standpoint of their adherence to the teachings of Marx and Lenin. There is a phrase entitled, quote, labor education, end quote, which is current in the labor movement. There is no such thing as, quote, labor education. Quote, education is given from the revolutionary standpoint of Marx and Lenin, or it is, quote, education, end quote, or is, quote, education, which leads to a conformity and an adaptation to the bourgeois order. This must never be lost sight of in any of the educational work. We must be intransigent in this conception of education, and so must the workers' school. We must be, quote, narrow-minded, end quote, and intolerant on this score, imparting knowledge or culture not from any, quote, general, end quote, standpoint, which in the last analysis becomes the standpoint of the bourgeoisie, but from the standpoint only of Marxism and Leninism. There is a conception of this so-called labor education, in my opinion, utterly false, which has become widespread. Scott Nearing recently expressed the opinion that the, quote, united front, end quote, tactic should be applied in workers' schools. Our answer to this point of view is that if there is one place where the united front should not be applied, it is the field of education. According to our point of view, the only theory which correctly analyzes capitalist society and correctly maps out the road of the struggle for its overthrow is the theory of Marxism and Leninism. We cannot find a common meeting ground with any other theory or any other brand of education. The workers' school does not represent a united front in the field of education. The workers' school must be a partisan school, a weapon in the hands of the party for implanting the party ideology in the minds of the students who attend its classes. I should like to deal now with the question of education in connection with our trade union activities. I speak with particular reference to the trade union activities because at the present time it is our main field of work, although the points made apply to all fields of activity in the daily struggle. Our party members in the trade unions are obliged to carry out widespread and many-sided activities, the sum total of which comprises a very large percentage of our party work. That is rightly so, because the trade unions are the basic and elementary organizations of the proletariat, and the success of our party in its efforts to become a party of the masses depends to a very large extent upon its ability to work in the trade unions and to follow out a correct policy in all of its work there. To arrive at the correct policy in dealing with the complex problems which constantly come up in the trade unions, a firm grasp on theory is absolutely indispensable. However, theory is badly lacking in this field amongst the comrades in the ranks who have to carry out the work. The reason for this is obvious. The members who join our party directly from the trade unions come to it as a rule because they are drawn to the party in the daily struggle over immediate questions. They become convinced, by seeing our party in action and working with it, that it is a real party of the workers which fights for the immediate interests of the workers, and on that basis the workers come to the party. As a rule, they do not go through a course of study before admission and do not inquire very deeply into the fundamental theory upon which the party's whole life and activity is founded. Consequently, for our comrades in the trade unions to attempt to work out a line of tactics in relation to the employers, in relation to the reactionary labor leaders, progressive labor leaders, and various other currents and tendencies in the trade union movement, and to coordinate everything with our general political aims, their own empiric experience is not a sufficient foundation. They are bound to become over-practical if they have no other guide, and to drift into tactics which lead them inevitably away from the revolutionary struggle. The communists in the trade unions can be successful only if they approach all of their tasks from the standpoint of correct revolutionary theory, and of all of their activities imbued with this theory. Two serious errors manifest themselves in the party in connection with theory and practical work in the trade unions. On the one hand, we are confronted every now and then with a prejudice on the part of the rank-and-file workers in the trade unions against theory and theoreticians, and a resentment against any interference of this kind in their work. All the party leaders, especially the comrades leading our trade union work, have encountered this prejudice. On the other hand, we frequently see comrades who have gained all their knowledge from books and who have had no experience in the actual struggle of the workers, especially comrades who can be classified under the general heading of, quote, intellectuals, end quote, adopting a condescending and superior attitude towards the comrades who do the practical work of the party in the daily struggles in the unions. They take a pedagogical and supervisory attitude towards the trade union comrades and thus antagonize them and lose the possibility of influencing them and learning from them. Both these attitudes are false, and in my opinion, the workers' school must help the party to overcome them by systematic, persistent, and determined opposition to both. We must oppose the prejudice of some of the practical trade union comrades who are new in the party and who have not yet assimilated its main theories, against theory and party workers theoretically trained. We must oppose and resist in the most determined fashion any tendency on their part to separate their work from the political and theoretical work of the party, and to resent the introduction of theoretical and political questions into their discussion of the daily work in the unions. And likewise to the comrades who have book knowledge only, we must make it clear that the theory of the party gets its life only when it is related to the practical daily struggle and becomes a part of the equipment of the comrades who carry on the struggle. They must learn how to approach the practical workers and collaborate with them in the most fraternal and comradely manner. And they must not under any circumstances adopt a superior and pedagogical attitude towards them. This very attitude in itself manifests an ideological defect. A communist intellectual who cannot identify himself with the trade unionists in the party and make himself one with them is not worth his salt. The separation of theory and practice, the arbitrary line between the theoretical work and practical work, the arbitrary division of activity into theoretical activity and practical activity, must be combated and overcome. We must set up against it the conception of the organic connection between theoretical and practical work, and a fraternal collaboration between theoretically trained comrades and comrades carrying out the practical work in the daily struggle, especially in the trade union movement. Our party, in common with the other parties of the International, is confronted by two dangers, which militate against its effectiveness in the class struggle. One of the dangers is left sectarianism, which is a deviation from the line of Marxism and Leninism in the direction of syndicalism, and the other is right opportunism, which is defined in the Fifth Congress resolution as a deviation from Leninism in the direction of the emasculated Marxism of the Second International. These dangers can be overcome and the party remain on the right road only if it succeeds in carrying on a successful struggle against these deviations. Educational work is an important means to this end. Educational work, therefore, is not a mere academic activity. In a certain sense, educational work is a fight. Educational work is a fight to overcome these dangers by building in the party ranks of true and firm and uniform proletarian ideology. It must help the party in the fight against the right deviationists without falling back into the error of deviations to the left. The workers' school must be for the party one of the most important means by which we impress in the minds of the party members a knowledge of Marxian and Leninist theory, of developing a respect for theory and an understanding of its fundamental importance, without falling into the error of teaching theory in an abstract manner and separating theory from the daily activities of the party. Our party must be at the same time a party of theory and a party of struggle, with theory and struggle closely interlocked and inseparable, without allowing the party members to develop into mere fault-finding, them to acquire the faculty of criticism, of subjecting every action and every utterance of the party to criticism from the standpoint of its conformity to the basic theory of the movement. We do not want a party consisting half of critics and half of practical workers, but every party member must be at the same time a critic and a constructive worker. The party must be a party of study and struggle. All the party members must be trained to become thinkers and doers. These conceptions carried out in actual practice will be the means whereby we can rapidly transform our party into a communist party in the true sense of the word. We have every reason to be proud of the response the workers' school has met in the ranks of the party membership in New York. The enthusiastic support it has already gained gives us the hope that our educational work, which we have so long neglected, can now be developed extensively, and that all who are most active and alive in the party will join in the task of making it move forward. The party members in New York should look upon the workers' school as their own institution, as their own educational center, which, by fraternal collaboration of all the comrades, can be built and maintained as a real leader in the fight for Leninist ideology in the party, in the light to shake off the paralyzing inheritance of the past and emerge in the shortest possible time, through the process of careful study and vigorous struggle, into a party complying with the specifications of a Bolshevik party which were laid down by the Fifth Congress. That is, quote, a central monolithic party hewn of one piece, end quote. That is, quote, a central monolithic party hewn of one piece, end quote. That is, quote, essentially a revolutionary and Marxist party, undeviating, in spite of all circumstances, proceeding towards the goal and making every effort to bring nearer the hour of victory of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie, end quote. That's the end of this piece, which was labeled The Bolshevization of the Party by James Buchanan, 1924, which was a speech of the 5th of October, 1924, published in The Workers' Monthly, November 1924, reprinted in James Buchanan and the Early Years of American Communism, Selected Writings and Speeches, 1928 to 1928. The next piece is labeled, Keep the Necessary Equilibrium Between Democracy and Centralism. It says Leon Trotsky, parenthesis, 1937, 1938, 1939, end parenthesis. To the editors of Socialist Appeal, parenthesis, USA, end parenthesis, during the past months I have received letters in regard to the inner regime of Revolutionary Party from several apparently young comrades unknown to me. Some of these letters complain about the, quote, lack of democracy, end quote, in your organization, about the domineering of the, quote, leaders, end quote, and the like. Individual comrades ask me to give a, quote, clear and exact formula on democratic centralism, end quote, which would preclude false interpretations. It is not easy to answer these letters. Not one of my correspondents even attempts to demonstrate clearly and correctly with actual examples exactly wherein lies the violation of democracy. On the other hand, insofar as I, a bystander, can judge on the basis of your newspaper and your bulletins, the discussions in your organization is being conducted with full freedom. The bulletins are filled chiefly by representatives of a tiny minority. I've been told the same holds true of your discussion meetings. The decisions are not yet carried out. Evidently they will be carried through at a freely elected conference. In what, then, could the violations of democracy have been manifested? This is hard to understand. Sometimes, to judge by the tone of the letters, i.e. in the main instance by the formlessness of the grievances, it seems to be that the complainers are simply dissatisfied with the fact that in spite of the existing democracy, they prove to be in a tiny minority. Through my own experience, I know that this is unpleasant, but wherein is there any violation of democracy? Neither do I think that I can give such a formula on democratic centralism that, quote, once and for all, end quote, would eliminate misunderstandings and false interpretations. A party is an active organism. It develops in the struggle with outside obstacles and inner contradictions. The malignant decomposition of the Fourth and Third Internationals, under severe conditions of the imperialist epoch, creates from the Fourth International difficulties unprecedented in history. One cannot overcome them with some sort of magic formula. The regime of a party does not really fall ready-made from the sky, but is formed gradually in struggle. A political line predominates over the regime. First of all, it is necessary to define strategic problems and tactical methods correctly in order to solve them. The organizational form should correspond to the strategy and the tactic. Only a correct policy can guarantee a healthy party regime. This, it is understood, does not mean that the development of the party does not realize organizational problems as such. But it means that the formula for democratic centralism must inevitably find a different expression in the parties of different countries and in different stages of the development of one and the same party. Democracy and centralism do not at all find themselves in an invariable ratio to one another. Everything depends on the concrete circumstances on the political situation in the country, on the strength of the party and its experience, and the general level of its members, on the authority the leadership has succeeded in winning. Before a conference, when the problem is one of formulating a political line for the next period, democracy triumphs over centralism. When the problem is political action, centralism subordinates democracy to itself. Democracy again asserts its rights when the party feels the need to examine critically its own actions. The equilibrium between democracy and centralism establishes itself in the actual struggle. At moments it is violated and then again reestablished. The maturity of each member of the party expresses itself particularly in the fact that he does not demand from the party regime more than it can give. The person who defines his attitude to the party by the individual fillips that he gets on the nose is a poor revolutionist. It is necessary, of course, to fight against every individual mistake of the leadership, every injustice and the like, but it is necessary to assess these, quote, injustices and, quote, mistakes, not in themselves, but in connection with the general development of the party both on a national and international scale. A correct judgment and a feeling for proportion in politics is an extremely important thing. The person who has propensities for making a mountain out of a molehill can do much harm to himself and to the party. The misfortune of such people as Euler, Field, Weisbord, and others, bracket, people who had splintered from the Trotskyist movement in the early and mid-1930s, and bracket, consist in their lack of feeling for proportion. At the moment, there are not a few half-revolutionists tired by defeats, fearing difficulties, aged young men who have more doubts and pretensions than will to struggle. Instead of seriously analyzing political questions in essence, such individuals seek panaceas, on every occasion complain about the, quote, regime, end quote, demand wonders from the leadership, or try to muffle their inner skepticism by ultra-left prattling. I fear that revolutionists will not be made out of such elements unless they take themselves in hand. I do not doubt, on the other hand, that the young generation of workers will be capable of evaluating the programmatic and strategic contents of the Fourth International according to merit, and will rally to its banner in ever greater numbers. Each real revolutionist who notes down the blunders of the party regime should first of all say to himself, quote, we must bring into the party a dozen new workers, end quote. The young workers will call the gentlemen skeptics, grievance mongers, and pessimists to order. Only along such a broad road will a strong, healthy party regime be established in the sections of the Fourth International. Again, this piece is from Leon Trotsky, 1937, 1938-39, and is labeled in the book, Keep the Necessary Equilibrium Between Democracy and Centralism. Apparently this is from a piece titled On Democratic Centralism from December 1937. The next piece is titled, or labeled, Genuine Honest Democracy by Leon Trotsky. This is from a piece titled Towards a Revolutionary Youth Organization on the 18th of November, 1938. I believe democracy is very important in the organization. Why? Because democracy is perishing everywhere in the states, in the trade unions, in the old revolutionary parties. Only we can permit genuine, honest democracy so that a young worker, a young student can feel he has the possibility of expressing his opinion openly without being immediately subjected to persecution. Ironical statements from someone in authority is also persecution. We can attract new members to the youth, bracket, organization, end bracket, as to the party only by genuine, intelligent democracy. Everybody is tired of the lack of democracy, ... We cannot establish with one blow or with one resolution the authority of the party. We cannot create the authority for the party with one resolution. If the young comrades have 2, 3, 5, or 10 experiences proving to them that the party is more wise, more experienced, then they will become more cautious in their opposition to the party and more moderate in the forms of this opposition. Anyone who speaks in a tone of contempt to the party will immediately feel around himself a vacuum of irony and contempt, and it will educate the people. But if we approach the young comrades with a general conception such as this, quote, boys and girls, you acted very well against the Socialist Party because it was a bad party, but we are a good party, don't forget it. You must not oppose us, end quote. How can you convince them with such a general conception? It is very dangerous, quote, you believe it is a good party, but we don't believe it, end quote. ... Quote, you are bureaucrats, no more, no less, end quote. It is very dangerous. Theoretically, it is correct. With the question of discipline, iron discipline, steel discipline is absolutely necessary. But if the apparatus of the young party begins by demanding such iron discipline on the first day, it can lose the party. It is necessary to educate confidence in the leadership of the party, and the party in general, because the leadership is only an expression of the party. We can fail now in two directions, one in the direction of centralization, the other in the direction of democracy. I believe now we should exaggerate the democracy and be very, very patient with centralism in this transitional time. We must educate these people to understand the necessity of centralism. This piece was labeled "Genuine Honest Democracy" by Leon Trotsky, and it's originally from a piece titled "Towards a Revolutionary Youth Organization" from the 18th of November, 1938. The next piece is titled "No Reason to Hinder," or labeled "No Reason to Hinder Discussion" by Leon Trotsky. This is from a letter to Rose Carstner, parenthesis, James P. Cannon's partner, end parenthesis. 28th of September 1939, published for the first time in Trotsky's Writings, Supplementary Volume 1934 to 1940, and not included in Defense of Marxism. Dear Comrade Rose, I sent simultaneously the Russian text of the USSR article, the USSR in War, to Vansler for translation. I don't see, I must confess, any reason to hinder discussion on this matter. Better take the initiative and to show that the events did not take us unaware. It would be good if you communicate to me the reactions of comrades of both camps to the last article on the USSR. Your warmest comradely greetings, Leon Trotsky. Again, that end of that piece, which is labeled "No Reason to Hinder Discussion" by Leon Trotsky, and which is a letter to Rose Carstner, James Buchanan's partner, 28th of September 1939, published for the first time in Trotsky's Writings, Supplementary Volume 1934 to 40, and not included in Defense of Marxism. The next piece is labeled "A Serious Educational Discussion" by Leon Trotsky. This is a letter to James Buchanan, October 1939, printed for the first time in James Buchanan's The Struggle for a Proletarian Party, with the explanation that it had been omitted in error from the collection In Defense of Marxism. Dear Jim, two things are clear to me from your letter of October 24th. One, that a very serious ideological fight has become inevitable and politically necessary. Two, that it would be extremely prejudicial, if not fatal, to connect the ideological fight with the perspective of split, of a purge or expulsions, and so on and so forth. I heard, for example, that Comrade Gould proclaimed in a membership meeting, quote, "You wish to expel us," end quote. But I don't know what reaction came from the other side to this. I, for my part, would immediately protest with the greatest vehemence such suspicions. I would propose the creation of a special control commission in order to check such affirmations and rumors. If it happens that someone of the majority launches such threats, I, for my part, would vote for a censor or severe warning. You may have many new members or uneducated youth. They need a serious educational discussion in the light of the great events. If their thoughts at the beginning are obsessed by the perspective of personal degradation, i.e., demotions, loss of prestige, disqualifications, eliminations from Central Committee, etc., ... and so on, the whole discussion would become envenomed, and the authority of the leadership would be compromised. If the leadership, on the contrary, opens a ruthless fight against petty bourgeois idealistic conceptions and organizational prejudices, but at the same time guarantees for the discussion itself and for the minority, the result would be not only an ideological victory, but an important growth in the authority of the leadership. Quote, "A conciliation and a compromise at the top," end quote, on the questions which form the matter of the divergences would of course be a crime. But I, for my part, would propose to the minority at the top an agreement, if you wish, a compromise in the methods of discussion and parallelly on the political collaboration. For example, A, both sides eliminate from the discussion any threats, personal denigration, and so on. B, Both sides take the obligation of loyal collaboration during the discussion. C. Every false move, threats or rumors of threats, or a rumor of alleged threats, resignations, and so on, should be investigated by the National Committee or a special commission as a particular fact and not thrown into the discussion, and so on. If the majority accepts such an agreement, you will have the possibility of disciplining the discussion and also the advantage of having taken a good initiative. If they reject it, you can at every party membership meeting present your written proposition to the minority as the best refutation of their complaints and as an example of, quote, our regime, end quote. It seems to me that the last convention failed at a very bad moment, the time was not ripe, and became a kind of abortion. The genuine discussion comes sometime after the convention. This signifies that you can't avoid a convention at Christmas or so. The idea of a referendum is absurd. It could only facilitate a split on local lines. I believe that the majority of the above-mentioned agreement can propose to the minority a new convention on the basis of two platforms with all the organizational guarantees for the minority. The convention is expensive, but I don't see any other means of concluding the present discussion and the party crisis it produces. J. Hansen, Leon Trotsky, October 28, 1939. P.S. Every serious and sharp discussion can, of course, lead to some desertions, departures, or even expulsions, but the whole party should be convinced from the logic of the facts that they are inevitable results occurred in spite of the best will of the leadership, and not an objective or aim of the leadership, and not the point of departure of the whole discussion. This is, in my mind, the decisive point of the whole matter. That's the end of this piece, which was labeled, of course, A Serious Educational Discussion by Leon Trotsky. And it's from a letter to James P. Cannon from October 1939, printed for the first time in James P. Cannon's The Struggle for a Proletarian Party, with the explanation that had been omitted in error from the collection In Defense of Marxism. Okay, so that's the end of Chapter 12. Thank you for listening.